Okay, good afternoon. I'd like to call the special meeting of the Comox Valley Regional District of Tuesday, May 31st to order. First, I'd like to welcome the members of the public and let them know if they need to use the washroom, you can go back out the doors that you came in and around the corner behind the boardroom, there's the washrooms. And in case of emergency, the marshalling point is out there in the parking lot. So I'd like to recognize that we're on the unceded traditional territory of the Comox First Nation and has become our practice at the board. We try to educate both ourselves and members of the public around the call to action for Truth and Reconciliation Commission, calls to action report. And today we have call to action number 5, which has to do with child welfare. We call upon the federal, provincial, territorial, and Aboriginal governments to develop culturally appropriate parenting programs for Aboriginal families. Thank you. And with that, we move to reports. And before we go to the Let's Talk, I'm just going to pass it to Alana to open it up for us. Thanks.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Chair Kettler. Are you going to say something, Russell? No. Thanks very much for having us here today. We've called this a climate workshop, and we've invited Tina Willard-Steffen to join us to help get us started on the right foot and to help properly cast a theme to tonight's session. Many of you will know Tina from her good work through our CBRD water service, as well as through the Comox Strathcona waste management service and work with our staff and the waste management board. As you know, likely Tina is an educator and a facilitator in our community and has spent a lot of time thinking about climate and how to talk about climate in a way that can help us all really be part of the change that's needed. So after Tina's presentation, she has a great presentation lined up for us. Some of you might be familiar with it, but it's so good that we wanted to bring it to you again. Then we'll get into some staff reports, which I'll introduce, or Russell will introduce as we come along. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you, please, to Tina Willard-Steffen. Thanks, Tina.
Thanks. I'm not familiar with the technology, so it may take me a moment. So let's talk climate. Thank you for the introduction. I'm going to have some notes here I'm following along with, and hopefully everything works. So here we are. This is where we are, right there where that arrow is. And in terms of how I came to be in this particular strand of this work is I've had a really varied career that settled most recently into working as a facilitator and contract environmental educator, primarily for the CVRD and Comox Strathcona Waste Management, as Alana said. And at first, the role unfolded as this 3 R's vibe where I was visiting classrooms until more and more I would have students as young as 6 or 7 coming up to me and saying things like, the world is ending in 7 years anyways, so why bother? So although I'm not a climate scientist, my role in education and communication sent me down the path of thinking more about this much bigger picture than just waste reduction. And a part of this has been researching the case for climate hope and optimism and how this motivates more change more quickly. Because we have a varied and likely super skilled group in the room, I am going to do a quick 101. What is climate change? Because I want to make sure we're all starting on the same place. So climate change, or what is now often called the climate crisis, is the term used to refer, this isn't clicking, sorry, is the term used to refer to an increased rate of change in the climate caused by human impacts. Sorry, I have to remember that I'm scrolling along with my notes, but you are not. Excuse me for one moment. That's okay. Thank you. So the science is clear. Energy comes to the Earth from the sun, and the sun is our primary source of energy for the Earth's climate system. It makes life on Earth possible by warming the biosphere, driving the water cycle and the wind, and photosynthesizing plants, including, of course, our food. And about 71% of total incoming solar energy is absorbed. The remainder is reflected back into space by clouds, atmospheric particles, and bright ground surfaces like sea ice and snow. But some of the outgoing infrared is trapped by the natural greenhouse gas layer, which is great because it keeps the temperatures within comfortable boundaries for all life forms on Earth, including us. So greenhouse gases actually play an instrumental role in regulating the planet's temperatures. Gases like carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, et cetera, trap the sun's energy in the atmosphere, and the resulting greenhouse effect keeps the world's annual average surface temperature at about 15 degrees Celsius, which is 30 degrees warmer than it would be if we didn't have an atmosphere. The problem is we're thickening this natural greenhouse gas layer with artificial human greenhouse gas emissions, and more of the outgoing heat is trapped and temperatures are going up. So today, higher concentrations of greenhouse gases trap more incoming solar energy than goes out, and the result, of course, is global warming. Since 1900, there's been a 43% increase in this warming effect. And experts speak about this from the perspective that we're essentially treating our atmosphere like an open sewer without understanding the delicate balance that needs to be maintained. But it's not an open sewer. This is our atmosphere. The lower part of the atmosphere where the greenhouse gases are collected is shockingly thin, and we're filling it up. So this is a beautiful photo from NASA's Earth Observatory. This is the layer we need to maintain balance within, and it's only 16 kilometers thick, which is kind of crazy to think about. And where's it coming from? Well, it's coming from the burning of fossil fuels in transportation, energy production, mining, agriculture, particularly animal agriculture is a part of this, burning and clearing of forests and green spaces, thawing of permafrost, and other sources. Many of these are categories or areas in which you are all responsible for decision making. So I'm really happy to be here today. The main source is by far the burning of fossil fuels, which really went into overdrive after World War II. And now we see this huge accumulation of CO2 in the atmosphere. This graph shows, just going to flash by some graphs for you. You're just going to notice the curve up for the most part. This is a graph showing global carbon emissions from fossil fuels in billion metric tons of carbon for sciencey folks from 1950 to 2020. As a consequence, the temperatures of the Earth have been going up steadily and setting new records every year. So this is another graph showing global average surface temperature anomalies from 1880 to 2020. So what does this end up looking like to us, and how does it affect us? Well, on one day last year, there were at least 4 countries that hit temperatures about 50 degrees Celsius. And this is a map showing global surface air temperatures in 2021. The single most anomalous event ever measured was the Pacific Northwest of North America earlier last year, just shockingly high temperatures all the way up, of course, to us and into British Columbia. It says on this map, Lytton hit 46.6, but I have been corrected. I think they actually hit 49 degrees Celsius. But when we step back and look at the Earth as a whole, 93% of this extra heat's going into the oceans, and it's disrupting the water cycle. And the warmer ocean temperatures have been hitting records almost every year now. This is a chart showing global ocean temperature anomalies from baseline from 1940 to 1920. Ocean temperatures continue to set new records. Now, how does this affect us? Well, warmer oceans make storms much stronger. This is a recent example in the Western Hemisphere of Hurricane Ida, which went over waters of Gulf Mexico, which was 4 degrees Celsius warmer than normal. Sorry, I don't know who to look at. Essentially, warmer oceans mean stronger storms, more intense storms, rapid intensification of storms, higher wind speeds, warmer air can hold more water vapor. which I just learned when I was researching this. So warmer oceans and warmer air results in more water evaporating from the ocean surface into the atmosphere. So more of it's going up. And for every degree Celsius that the atmosphere warms, the air can hold 7% more water vapor, which is huge. And in turn, this extra water vapor leads to heavier downpours and subsequent flooding. So basically, as temperatures increase, oceans evaporate moistures into the sky. This is a really cool photo, sad as well, but these massive rain bombs cause tremendous amount of damage. We know that. This is a quadruple microburst in Texas. I thought the photo was cool. And again, a little more locally, we can see the lower mainland when we see flooding. And then even more locally, of course, Courtney, this is 2014, but we have seen a lot of flooding like this since then. Thanks, Will Cole Hamilton, for providing me with this photograph. So the same heat that evaporates more water from the ocean causes bigger off the oceans, and the rain bombs and the floods and the mudslides is also pulling the moisture out of topsoil around the world and making droughts seem much deeper and longer. So this kind of drought, most people think of as, most of us think of as a meteorological drought when there's a long period of time without rain, but there are actually other kinds of droughts. One is a hydrological drought, which refers to the effect of decreased precipitation on stream flow, soil moisture, and the level of fresh water bodies and groundwater recharge. We see that here often. Farmers are most concerned with agricultural drought, which is when available water supplies are unable to meet crop water demands. We see agricultural drought without meteorological drought. For example, and we see this here, with earlier snowmelt leads to reduced water availability during peak summer demand. So the risk of hydrological and agricultural drought increases, of course, as temperatures rise. And close to home, these red regions are indicative of drought. This is where we grow our food, and this is where there's drought. And when there's more drought, higher temperatures, the fires increase almost in lockstep, of course, and we experience more and more of these in BC each year. This is a quote from the mayor of Lytton. He said, "I am 60 and I thought that climate change was a problem for the next generation, and now I'm mayor of a town that no longer exists." Of course, Lytton still exists, but much of their infrastructure was burned down in a fire 2 years ago. And the extra heat is also melting glaciers. This is in Greenland and Antarctica. This is a Greenland glacier that is now gone. And here we have our beloved Comox glacier, also receding, as you can see in the photos. These actually aren't that recent. I don't know if you can see them because of the zoom, but we do know that our glacier is receding. This article is from 5 years ago, so it's predicted to be gone within about 20 years. So we have this Arctic ice loss as well. This is a slide. Of course, all this raises sea levels, right? And so this is a slide shows nearly 1/3 of the world's population, or 2.4 billion people, live within 100 kilometers of coastline. So do we. And we're vulnerable to rising sea levels. So in addition, winter seasons are becoming shorter with warmer days, perpetuating ice melt. So on it goes. And this does affect us, especially because we are a coastal community. Internationally, most at risk are those that live in low-lying Pacific islands, like the citizens of Kiribati, some of whom have already been directed to purchase property elsewhere. And we also see strain on our infrastructure. So not only do we all have businesses, beloved recreation areas, and homes that will be impacted by water rise, combined with extreme weather events, but our systems get put under really big strain around here. And sorry, that's not clicking for me. There we go. It is the poorest of the poor in the world that includes poor people in prosperous societies who are getting to be the worst hit. So we know this also. This affects people far away, like in northern Mozambique. This affects people, you'll see here, these are folks in Mozambique, and then closer to home in Canada. I'm not keeping up with myself with my notes, excuse me. So a lot of climate refugees are leaving places they've always called home. And this includes in Canada. So this is a picture of Mabano in Weenusk First Nation. He's trying to set up camp for caribou hunting on a frozen river. And in 2019, as a result of warming temperatures, ice and snow covers often thinner and more unstable. And even, excuse me, there's a delay in that clicking there, even closer to home. So this is a great picture of staff and board members in front of the Connect Warming Center, and an article about how extreme weather is affecting people who are unhoused or underhoused in our own communities. My final point on the effect of climate crisis, don't worry, I'm getting there, it is actually a climate hope and optimism talk, is that climate and biodiversity are inextricably connected with each other and human futures. So why are all these things so linked? Climate change impacts ecosystem health, like it dries trees out, it creates drought, and ecosystem health, if it's well, helps us deal with climate change. So healthy ecosystems, oh darn, excuse me. Healthy ecosystems, which include diversity of species, provide services to us that mitigate climate change. They sequester carbon, support the storage of water and soil, grow food, protect us from extreme weather events. And so we need to encourage, nurture, and protect biodiversity, not just as a feel-good thing or a tree-hugging thing, but actually for our own survival. And youth in many areas are taking the lead of young environmental activist Greta Thunberg. Greta, see, I forgot to click through there. They're calling for a protect, restore, and a fund approach to be sure that considerations around biodiversity are made when moving forward with climate resilience planning. So this is actually a very important part of our survival. This is an Instagram post locally from the Comox Valley Land Trust. No effective climate solutions can happen without conservation and reforestation. In fact, natural climate solutions can get us 1/3 of the way to our emission reductions target. So forests and ecosystems like this are a really big part of what we need to be working on. Climate change and biodiversity loss should always be tackled together. So climate change is one of the main drivers of biodiversity loss, but destruction of ecosystems undermines this. So these are important considerations during decision making as well. And whew, I know a lot, especially considering I was asked to speak about climate hope and optimism, but as I said, I am getting there. One of the most important things we need to do when taking on this new perspective is we need to understand what is real and address our own fears. So stress and uncertainty over a long time scale actually is really hard on our overall well-being, our brains, our bodies, and it creates paralysis in terms of taking action, which is what we're really trying to do. So helping people translate their fears into action helps to offset this emotional toll, as well as create change moving forward in a positive direction. Anxiety about the future, detachment, self-deception. I think we see a lot of cognitive dissonance, feelings of resentment and helplessness. These are perilous psychological states that are fast track to the end of hope. And it makes the future we fear far more likely to happen, because it's actually the best way to ensure we'll fail to solve our problem is to believe that we can't. So that's part of why I'm here today. So self-care is really important. Many of you probably recognize one of these numbers as to how you feel about climate change. Anyone want to hold up their hands and show me what number they are on this? I feel like today I'm actually about a 7. I was a 1 yesterday. Some days I'm a 12. And so this is actually how I feel about climate change. I oscillate between these two perspectives here. Really common, get hopeful, and then maybe not so hopeful. So I'm going to get into what helped me work through that, some of which is actually a Chinese word in Mandarin, wei ji. And the accurate translation of this word for crisis is a crucial point when something is going to change. So change is in the definition of crisis, and thinking of the climate crisis in this way can be really helpful. Climate change is real. The anthropogenic impacts on the earth, as I've just finished describing, have created real problems that we as a species need to address, and this means change. But every one of us is going to need to grapple with this changing world, but there's nothing in this definition of change that says the world will come to an end in 7 years. So this definition of change includes replace with something else, especially something of the same kind that is newer or better. Substitute one thing for another. This is a cartoon I've had on my fridge for about 20 years. It says, I was wondering when you'd notice there's a lot more steps. So I'm going to keep revisiting this idea that we're in a story of sorts. So if you think of the way we're living right now, we're in the middle of this big story. Humans have been in this area which we live, which was acknowledged at the beginning by Jesse. Thank you. Humans have been in this area for more than 10,000 years. And now we're here now, we're in the position we're in, and the story will continue. The story continues on, and we are a part of writing that story. So humans actually think in stories. This is well researched as well. So I want folks, really, my mission is to get people to think of what vision of a future we want to create for our children and for ourselves. There are ways of, we're all telling stories to ourselves all the time. This is how we think. So in times of perplexing, unprecedented, and dangerous threats, we can learn a lot from the childhood imagination. I end up working with kids a lot. That wonderful capacity to generate the endless, like, how about this? How about that? How about I'm a king and you're my horse? How about I'm a dragon and I hop in and save the day? And so for us to succeed and prosper, oh my goodness, I did it again to my notes, excuse me. For us to succeed and prosper, we want to activate our ability to imagine possibilities without quickly intervening with constraints and fear and cynicism and the systems that tend to get in our way of being imaginative. So while certain uncertainties quite reasonably provoke fear and anxiety, the fact is that hope is a feeling that can only exist with uncertainty. When we're certain about something, we don't need to hope. So it turns out that being optimistic about the future of our environment is a very, very well-researched methodology to motivate people to make the changes we want to see happen in our culture and to address the very real and scary issues that we're facing today around climate change. So the person on the top left there is Alina Bennett. She's an associate professor in the Department of Natural Resources at McGill University and started a group called Seeds of Good Anthropocenes, which collects and studies the ways that people address environmental problems. So the Anthropocene is a period in the history, for those of you who don't know, is a period in the history of the Earth during which human activity has been the dominant influence on climate and the environment. So Alina's take is that people make choices based on what they believe about society and what they expect for the future. So with this in mind, her organization is focusing on bright spots, highlighting successful, hyper-local focused projects related to climate resilience and researching the success of these projects, looking at ways to share them and scale them up. She says, we aim to, we aim to hope, excuse me, I just want to read a quote by her. We aim to help the global community develop inspirational visions and stories, helping them to shape the very reality that they forecast. We do this by looking to the emergence of new thinking, innovative ways of living, and different means to connect people and nature that already exist. So you'll see in the image on the right there, these are all bright spots that she's been researching all over the world in order to understand their efficacy and upscale them. And it's kind of what we're doing here today too. We're going to be reviewing some bright spots that the CVRD has created and will be creating. Ellen Kelsey on the bottom left is a scholar and educator in the area of evidence-based hope, and she's a leader in hopeful, solution-focused environmental movements. She speaks about the emotional implications of this doom and gloom narrative and how basically it's really horrible for us. But not only that, it's proven to demotivate people to make any sort of change. And I actually, rather than describing her work in detail, wanted to show you this 1-minute video. Oops. I wonder if this video will play for me. Are you able to do that? But if you just click on the image, it should play. We didn't test this. Are you able to just click on her face there and it should actually play? I'll continue on if it's not going to work. Will it play there? Oh, no. Read on her. We're going to carry on. All right. So basically, both of these amazing educators teach that while it's information on what's really happening, as I did at the beginning, is vitally important for people to understand, the focus of our attention should be more on where we want to join in, where we want to be heading, and formulating a more positive narrative about what that might look like. So a more positive story, as we think in stories, it's kind of like steering a car. The car is going to go where you're looking. And also, American sociologist Nicholas Christakis has this to say: we each carry within us an evolutionary blueprint for making a good society. So how do we activate our imaginations? Thomas Homer Dixon, who's written Commanding Hope, is a climate scientist, says the answers lie just outside of the periphery of our conscious imagination. So if we think and share in stories, how can we create a story that doesn't look like a Mad Max film? We need to be able to entertain the possibility that we won't know what it's going to look like. We don't actually know. Humans don't like to admit that we don't know what's going on, especially sometimes when we're in leadership, and that can be really hard. But we need to sort of understand that we don't necessarily know what it's going to look like and plan to be able to have very creative processes involved in planning. Another thing we can do is through connection to place. So people take really good care of what they love. It's a difficult topic for us to speak about because we can easily fall into despair and apathy if we stay in this doom and gloom place. But you as a CVRD do this through regional parks and greenways, strategic planning, and by supporting initiatives like the acquisition of watershed areas. You do this by supporting environmental education initiatives. Local place-based teacher resource guides have been developed by the CVRD, and these resources focus on connection to place. And the CVRD and CSWM-led initiatives see real change in the community, like 3 different schools who've installed green stations to help divert waste. So these seeds really do work. There's a key difference between hope that, it's passive. So I hope that I win the lottery, and hope too, which is active and bold. It's like a difference that affects our agency and a sense of control. And this psychological shift makes us agents in the story. So if we're living out a story, we want to be a protagonist that's deciding what happens next. It converts our object of hope and our vision of a desirable future into some goals and things that we can achieve through enacting policies and local projects that make a difference. And you've all chosen to work in one way or another in roles that play a part in writing this story. This is an awesome climate optimism video I was going to show you, but I'm not, because it's not going to work. Okay, so this is also, I think, a part of why Alana invited me here. Ellen Kelsey, she referred to this in the video you didn't see. It talks about the fallacy of the start line. So this fallacy of the start line is one of the things that was a huge aha moment for me when I started studying her work. This fallacy of the start line obstructs our ability to take action. So we hear about this giant thing called climate change out in front of us, and we become paralyzed because we don't know where to begin. We're just like, I don't know what to do. I don't know where to begin. So the reality is we've already begun, and we're in the middle of it. And we're in the middle of this amazing story unfolding where change is happening and coming and accelerating. There are people all over the world doing amazing things that we can magnify, join in with, support, or use as inspiration or templates for the work that we do. So this fallacy that we have to begin something big doesn't actually need to keep us from acting. So what can I do? We want to look at local bright spots and look at things that are shifting and how we throw ourselves behind those. And then it sort of magnifies from there. So some examples that I pulled during my research: the CVRD's signatory of the BC Climate Action Charter, which is a voluntary agreement between BC government and Union of BC municipalities. So under this charter, local governments are becoming carbon neutral, measuring and reporting their communities' greenhouse gas emissions, creating complete, compact, and more efficient communities. The Comox Youth Climate Council, after Greta Thunberg initiating Fridays for Future, began March this year. And I know that many people in this room have been involved in emotionally and policy-wise supporting the work of these young people, in the CVRDs, in fact, given them a grant for one of their projects. Comox Strathcona Waste Management is moving from a demolition to deconstruction model, a new direction for them, as well as and building a new compost program that should be available curbside in their entire region. So these are just tastes of projects that are bright spots, basically, that are happening. This fallacy of the start line is not true. Comox Valley Regional District launched the Road to 2030, which was a Comox Valley Climate Action Challenge. This was a participatory challenge to support community-led action projects. And small grassroots projects were funded, which is very much in keeping with Alina Bennett's approach around the well-researched evidence-based practice of supporting and amplifying small local actions for climate. Conversations like this hierarchy of travel modes are happening as a part of the Comox Valley Mobility Primer. You all know all this. I had to research it. The CVRD is currently actively involved in coastal flood mapping. The Airshed Roundtable project is working to establish short, medium, and long-term actions. We have a food hub project going on where the CVRD is moving forward with the first steps of implementing this. The province has just announced the launch of local government climate action program, which I think you're speaking about today, and that'll provide more predictable annual long-term funding for local climate action. So there'll be more of what I'm talking about. So this concept of just, it's like we don't want to look at the doom and gloom all the time. We just need to literally turn our focus to some of these things to amplify them. And so this is the story of our times, and you as leadership are supporting us in writing the next chapter of our story. And so I was really excited to be able to be here for your climate meeting to frame this in this way. And I'm happy to talk to anyone about it if you're interested afterwards. And I'm going to pass the mic. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks so much, Tina. And it's really good to have that as an opener and have some of our projects that we've been working on highlighted. I think it's hard for us to sometimes respond to the public about what are we doing when it is these little pieces, but very important pieces that we're working on. So thanks for that. And yeah, I'm not sure if we want to open it up or we'll just move on. Maybe I'll go to Alana for some guidance on that.
Thank you very much, Chair Kettler. Does anyone have any questions, perhaps of Tina, before we move into our reports?
I think it's good.
Great. Thanks
All
so
right.
much, Tina. That was great.
Stay in here about all the good bright spots.
Sure.
Wonderful. Thank you.
So thanks again, Tina, for setting that tone for us. On the theme of climate hope and optimism, and on integrating our ideas about crisis with the transformative impact of change, the WEJI that Tina spoke to, we want to talk to you about some of the work that we as staff have been undertaking over the last several months. This is work, as you know, that builds on work that others across the province have been doing for many, many years, sort of countering the fallacy of the start line that Tina referenced. Thanks, Lisa. We want to showcase some of the areas where we as local government can have positive impact, the areas where we have jurisdiction or influence, and in turn can be a force for change. So we'll be grounding our discussion tonight primarily in the areas or the sectors that fall on the left side of this continuum, the areas where we can have high impact. We want to talk about some of the bright spots, as Tina mentioned, here in the work of the CVRD. So tonight we'll be speaking to you about measuring our energy use and our greenhouse gas emissions so that we can understand the impact of our actions, both corporately and within the community. We'll be speaking to you about some ideas for getting our own house in order. And to be clear, you've already started that work, including the step that you took earlier this year by introducing a fleet electrification policy. We'll be speaking about community emissions in the electoral areas and how data can help inform decision-making across our region. We'll talk about how affordability considerations for our residents need to be part of this conversation about shifting behaviors and patterns. And so we'll share some updates on our rebate program and provide an update on Transition 2050. And finally, we'll speak to mobility and how we might think about shifting our transportation paradigm in order to enable the kind of changes that we hope to see. So here tonight, we've got a team of staff in Mike Sabarski, Daphne Mezerbura, and Robin Holm, and also Dustin Bennett. These folks will be presenting our reports tonight, and we will all then be available for your questions. Thanks very much. We'll get started with Mike.
Anna, there we go. Isa, do you have a presentation where you can grab it? Yeah, so thanks everybody for having us here. I'm going to first start talking about the corporate energy and emissions plan. This is not our first corporate energy plan. We started this many years ago after signing on to the Climate Action Charter. And so this is an update to that plan. We have been working at the old plan all along. We've had a number of projects that we've done which have reduced our corporate emissions. And more recently, we've had a number of projects which have increased our corporate emissions, primarily through new infrastructure, expanded service, those kinds of things. Oops, that went quick. So in 2021, we retained Stantec Consulting. They're actually the same company that did the original corporate energy plan. And we brought them in to do this corporate energy and emissions plan, which we're calling it now. The draft of that is complete. We had a lot of involvement from staff early on through some staff workshops, but also more recently to kind of talk about the implementation framework. Our corporate energy plan is really focused on the services that we operate, that we have some kind of control over. So our buildings, our fleet, our facilities, our infrastructure. And in line with some of the targets that are out there in provincial climate plans, federal climate plans, and even the global climate agreements, the new corporate energy plan establishes some pretty aggressive targets. We're talking about a 50% reduction by 2030 and a net zero target by 2050. So net zero means we're reducing our emissions by 90%, at least 90%. And then we can do a little bit of offsets or neutralization projects, which would be like a carbon sequestration type of project. But really we need to focus on reducing our energy, reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. And that's a bit of a shift from what we've been doing. So we have been carbon neutral for many years now, and that has been primarily through the purchase of carbon offsets. There have been some reductions, but mostly it's been through those purchases of carbon offsets. And we'll hear more about this year's purchase a little bit later on the agenda, but we really need to start moving away from purchasing carbon offsets and towards aggressive reductions. So luckily, on a positive note, we know where our emissions are coming from. We've done a recent update to our kind of corporate energy tracking process. We have a new software program. We have hired the experts in the field of greenhouse gas accounting to help us with this. So we know exactly where our corporate emissions are coming from. We also are luckily, we have staff that are very knowledgeable about our corporate operations, and they've been very helpful in identifying opportunities to reduce our emissions. So looking through our facilities, looking through our infrastructure, we have very concrete concrete projects that we can do to reduce our corporate emissions. And the world around us is changing too. So, 10 years ago, electric vehicles were kind of barely a thing, and now they're popping up everywhere. New heating and cooling technologies for buildings are coming online all the time. So it's very promising, the change that's happening around us. The graph on the right of this slide shows our energy use, and so we know most of it's coming from natural gas. Sorry, this isn't our energy use, this is our greenhouse gas emissions. So primarily our emissions are coming from fossil fuels. Natural gas, which we're using to heat our buildings primarily, and then the kind of next biggest sources are diesel consumption, which is from fleets and some of our contracted haulers in our solid waste department, for example, bringing waste to different facilities. So again, we know where the emissions are coming from. We've got a bit of a pathway forward. The corporate energy emissions plan identifies this pathway. This image on the bottom left kind of articulates that, where we're going to start phasing out natural gas and doing carbon decarbonization projects through our facilities, moving to biofuels and electrification over time. So we can definitely see a path forward here. The corporate energy emissions plan, like I mentioned, identified a number of projects and actions. This is just a quick summary. There's a big big document attached to the staff report, which included a lot more detail on all of these, but you can kind of get a sense of some of the actions. And these ones in particular are the kind of critical first steps, the ones we need to do between now and 2030 to stay on track for those longer term goals of being net zero by 2050. So we're looking at our green building policies and requirements. We're talking about commissioning programs where we go through and make sure that our facilities and our infrastructure is running efficiently, decarbonizing our rec facilities through insulation and different heating systems, looking at district energy and waste heat recovery opportunities, updating our purchasing policy to prioritize things that reduce greenhouse gases, and an internal cost of carbon policy, which I'll get to shortly here, which is one of the key steps for us. Yeah, so you kind of get a sense of what the projects are from this slide here. And these were the ones that were developed through our staff workshops, but also from the consultants identifying kind of those best practices from other local governments. The internal cost of carbon is basically carbon pricing. So we know now that there's a cost associated with greenhouse gases, and there's been a bunch of work that has happened over the last few years to kind of articulate that cost and put a value to it. So a number of local governments in BC, such as Metro Vancouver, City of Victoria, and many others are adopting this internal cost of carbon. Most have landed on $160 per ton as a net price. So that's net of something like the BC carbon tax, which right now is $50 a ton. So that means we would be using, possibly applying another $110 on top of that of our own money, or using this $160 per ton in our decision making. It will be used in a number of ways, but generally it's about establishing that value of the greenhouse gas emissions and helping us guide our decisions, whether we're looking at procurement of products or services, developing business cases for doing various things, life cycle cost analysis of some of the assets that we have. And we can use it to develop a funding source for some of these projects as well. So right now we budget $25 per ton to purchase carbon offsets. We've been doing that for years. We could look to budget $160 per ton into an internal carbon reserve. We could then use that to purchase carbon offsets in the kind of interim as we phase away from that. But we can also use that funding source to undertake projects that reduce our energy use, or other projects in the community that are related to climate change. And we may also have other funding sources that could be used to top up this internal carbon reserve, such as the new local government climate action program. From an implementation perspective, there's a bit of work to do ahead of us still. We have the report now from Stantec. We need to do some work within our departments to establish some of the policies and procedures, for example, around that internal cost of carbon and how we use it. We need to work with our different departments and start to kind of develop the operational plans for how we move forward with some of these projects. We're recommending to do that annually, where we would meet with each department, work with them to look at the projects they're kind of on their list, and how best to fit them within their financial plans, how best to fit them within their staffing resources or other projects that they have on the go. We need to do a little bit of work around understanding how some of these projects might impact our service level. I think this is primarily a little bit further away in the future, where we could see maybe some adjusted service levels depending on the nature of some of the projects. For example, if we're undertaking a major renovation of a rec facility, we're potentially looking at closing those facilities for some periods of time. So we need to do some looking at that. And we're going to do that between now and next year, and especially through the financial plan process that's upcoming. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions about the report from Stantec or any other aspect of our carbon energy and emissions.
Director Harbour.
Thanks, Mike. And Alana, that was really good to read the plan and to try to consider the range of policies and investment we could consider in the next 7 years anyways. I guess I hope to, using from before, right? I hope to be a little more to have bigger targets than what we're looking at. I think what at 50% by 2030, that is fine. That is what much of the world is expecting. But I think that once you enter that space, it's going to be so challenging to think about the transformative impact of that on our operations, that setting higher targets actually could save us money in the long run as you implement those changes. So I'll give you an example. I've been last month, I was one of the 10 judges for the Green Municipal Funds for all the projects across Canada over the last 2 years, and many of them were targeting greenhouse gas emission reduction. And I can't announce the winners, that will happen next February, but some of them, either in organizational buildings like we have or in housing projects, were achieving up to 93% greenhouse gas emission reduction, right? If we set a higher target, and I'll propose 70% by 2030, right? I would be curious to see what the financial impact would be in relation to setting a 50% target. It would also force the board to, well, first of all, if you set a higher target, maybe you'll end at 50%. The history of climate action has been, we set really, 50%, and then, we achieve like minus 5%, right? That's kind of the history of climate action. But at 70%, it really forces you into that transformative space, and it would lead the board to, and I hate to say it, I'm sure I'll trigger some of the actors, but it forces you to really think hard. For example, at the Recreation Commission, right? We're talking about a new arena, maybe a need for a new arena. Does it make sense to build and add infrastructure? You said a lot of our project and what's driving our emissions up are new infrastructure projects, right? So to think about really choices that are carbon driven to reach a high target. So 50% is okay, but I think that if we set a higher bar, I'd be really curious if that analysis could be done. Because when say that we decide to, we have an old building, right? And we're going to retrofit it. The major cost is just to get into the project. And once you get into it, maybe adding that, just for example, right, that four inches of installation and reaching a much higher target, like to really, and that's what I saw in those projects that are going to be winners of the Green Municipal Fund stuff, is just they went the extra mile. I have to say that some of our expert reviewers, because it wasn't just elected officials, they were actually a little bit disappointed by the cohort. Even with those amazing projects, they were like, we're actually expecting more if Canada as a whole is going to reach its 2030 targets. So I think what you have, I think in January, I called our climate action a C+ or something. And, this program with the operation takes us in the B+, but I'd like to challenge this board to go in the A category and set a higher target. Thanks.
Thank you. Mike, do you want to respond to that at all, or?
I was a B+ student in high school. Okay with that. No, yeah, I think 50% is going to be hard to achieve, and obviously it's up to the board how aggressive we want to be. I think on a project by project basis, we'll be striving for the best. Like if we're building a new recreation facility, it's not going to be a 50% energy reduction facility. It's going to be a net zero facility from day one. But corporately, we recognize that it might take time to get to these 50% and 90% through all the different things we do. So yeah, I mean, we can achieve net zero, as soon as we get enough money and support to do so, really.
Thanks. Okay, we'll move on. Director Cole Hamilton is next.
Yeah, thanks very much, Sharon. Thanks, Mike, for the report and the CEEP, the Community Energy and Emissions Plan. I would say in response to Director Arbor's comments, I see a lot of wisdom to that, and certainly the IPCC, which sets 50% as a target by 2030, does so with the caveat that that's a global goal, and that probably countries which have greater capacity to actually drive change should be taking a bit more of the heavy lifting than other communities. And certainly we are fortunate to be in a community and a nation which has the capacity to do a bit of that heavy lifting. So I think looking at some options that go beyond 50% and having them costed out so we could all give them the consideration they deserve, I would certainly support that. I had a question just about the scope of the plan, and in the SEEP we clarified that we'll account for what we're going to account for. We're not going to be counting upstream, which is like embodied emissions, or downstream emissions, which are disposal, and we're going to focus our effort on emissions that we have operational control over. And I see that's a very clear path that runs right through this. And there's one place where we kind of stray from that, and that's in terms of the methane emissions from the solid waste management. They're not considered in this plan, and that's based upon provincial guidance from 2007. My understanding from the report is that that was based upon a fear of double counting, which simply doesn't exist anymore. That concern isn't there, and therefore the rationale is questionable. And given that we're not counting, I guess I'd be interested in knowing if there's anyone who's counting those emissions and making plan where perhaps those get accounted for. And those emissions aren't small. My math was that every month the landfill has greater emissions than all of our corporate emissions for everything else in this report for a year. So the landfill emissions are 15 times our annual emissions from every other source, or based on my back of the envelope math, based upon an MIT auto emissions study, our landfill emissions are the equivalent of driving an average car to the moon every 10 hours. So it's really the elephant in the room. It's a very, very big source of emissions, and which is why I really appreciated what was in the report, where it stated that if the CVRD is serious about its commitment to climate change, it could consider recognizing all GHG emission sources in the GHG emission inventories over which the CVRD has operational control. And it also points out that the double counting isn't an issue, and that international standards do encourage counting this type of emission. And it also states that being sort of playing by the same rules and following the same international rules as others is probably a wise approach to the strategy generally. So I see staff there sort of just pointing out that there is a possibility of doing more, and that it accords with the best practices, and it allows us to get our hands on the biggest single source of emissions that we have. So we're not at a point where there's a motion on the floor, but when we do get to that point, I'd like to perhaps propose a resolution that we ask staff to create an addendum to this report, which applies the same standards and rigor that are in this excellent report to that additional category of emissions that are within our operational control, and they're with only our control. We're the only ones who can solve that problem, and it's as I said, it's not inconsiderable. So anyway, that's a motion I would like to make a little later on when we get to that point. Thanks.
Madam Chair, could I just ask for qualification so we better understand the difference from what we are accounting for at the landfill and what it is that you propose for us to account for?
Thank you. I think it was just the idea of integrating all of them into a single plan, which has the same emission targets, because I know that we do consider solid waste and other aspects of this report, but the one piece that we don't consider is the landfill. And I guess as the as the report states, that we could consider recognizing all of the emissions over which we have operational control, and apply the same standard to all of them. It just seems there's a kind of an internal logic that we're making changes. We should probably be considering all of our emissions and considering them kind of coherently in a single plan.
Thank you very much, Chair. And my advice with respect to the landfill and the targets that we set that is that we would refer such objectives to the Solid Waste Management Board, which includes the Strathcona Regional District Directors that oversee it. That as opposed to setting targets here at this table, we refer maybe Michael's report and the options for the Solid Waste Management Board to contemplate in terms of the targets that they set for their operations.
Thank you. And yeah, we can have further discussion once we've finished receiving this report. And we're on to Director McCollum.
Thanks, Chair, and I'm very happy to see this report come forward. I think there's a lot of really great content in this, and some initiatives that I think are going to have a great impact on how we do business in this organization. One thing that I really like to see emphasized that I haven't in many other discussions around this topic is the ongoing commissioning in the building and facilities piece of the report, and just how that doesn't get enough emphasis, how we do ongoing improvements and efficiencies when it comes to installing these HVAC systems and converting away from natural gas as our energy sources. And also that just has a great co-benefit in terms of the local economy when it comes to developing and creating demand for jobs, skilled jobs that are perhaps an alternative to some of the trades that are currently more based in the resource extraction industry. So I see that as something that is a good reason to front load some of our energy retrofits on our facilities, is just to get that capacity moving as early as possible in this process, because I think that that's a really great long-term benefit that we'll see in our community in terms of the local economy and job development. I had a couple of questions. One is just maybe I'm not completely clear on how that $160 cost of carbon is going to work in terms of that internal carbon initiatives. And so just a question around clarity. We're assigning a cost of $160. I assume 50 of that is basically a straight transfer of carbon tax that we pay. So there's 110 left over in our accounting. And so is that a fee that would be charged to individual services within our organization and then go into that internal reserve to then fund carbon initiatives across any service? Or would it be held in these different little compartments? I'm just trying to understand how we can utilize it.
Yeah, I mean, that's some of the work we'll do this year and into the financial plan processes to kind of understand really how that would work. But generally speaking, you are correct that we would budget essentially $110 per ton for each budget, each service, that they would then pay into this internal reserve, similar to what we do right now with the $25 ton. So every year we look at the previous year's emissions from each of the departments and we budget for that department based on $25 a ton. And that's what we've been using to buy carbon offsets. So kind of a similar approach, but whether the money is pooled and then available to all departments or it stays within each department, those are some of the things we need to work on this year to really understand kind of how it would work.
That makes sense. Yeah, and then the other follow-up or just comment around that is that, and I'm sure this will come out in the planning process, but given that there is the opportunity for kind of immediate savings in terms of this $160, I was wondering if there's going to be the possibility of moving some of these infrastructure investments up earlier in the plan and then having the borrowing funded by that 160, or just if it's hard to explain without a piece of paper sometimes, but if we get the savings early, then we're not creating the $160 fee, and then we have less money to fund the borrowing if we do it earlier in the plan than later. So it seems almost counterproductive, even though we're potentially saving on our carbon costs earlier on in the plan. So I'm just interested to see how that'll work itself out. Because of course I would prefer to see as many of these infrastructure changes early as possible and then us fund it through the the energy savings. And then just one other small question, if I may. In the timeline that you had up on your, I think it was your last slide, I'm just scrolling down here. The accounting for natural assets or recognizing natural assets as an asset class. Just curious why that's so far off in the implementation plan, why that wouldn't start sooner, 2030.
Just gonna try to jump into it. There we go. Well, that's hard to read. Sorry, the one that you're talking about is
6 or C6.
C6, recognizing natural assets as an asset class. You know, I think that one was kind of put there partly because of the carbon potential being a little bit lower initially. We're trying to set the kind of framework up. Let's set the foundation, I guess, with some of these earlier initiatives that start to get us towards some of the bigger reductions sooner. But if there's a willingness to move that one up, you know, I think that's definitely something that we can do within the plan.
Yeah, I was just curious of something I really appreciated about the structure of the plan is that a lot of the heavy lifting is very early on. So I'm not suggesting that I want to fiddle with it. I was just curious because that's kind of something that I would assume that the longer that we kind of recognize these things, the more benefit we get in terms of that carbon credit or however that accounting works. So anyway, I appreciate the answer. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, we have Director Grant.
Yeah, thank you. So I think in principle, this is actually makes a lot of sense and it's pretty good. My question is, before we start talking about ramping up to 70% reduction, how realistic is 50% in the next 7 years? And I guess I'm wondering, like we're starting at 2019, are we partway through that 50% already, or does that start today? Like, do we get to go back and say we already did 25% or?
Unfortunately, it's gone the other way.
All right. So I figured you were going to say that, but so I'm just wondering how realistic is a 50% reduction in a 7-year time frame? And I guess my second question is, seemingly this isn't going to be free. So where's the money going to come from? You know, in our community, the average tax bill this year went up 9%. And I got a couple of calls from bunch of fixed income guys and they said, geez, you guys said 4.5%, but it actually went up 9%. And of course, that extra 4.5% comes from hospital, library, regional district. So what happens at this board affects the people in our community too. And, you know, to be going and raising taxes really high right now, I don't think you could pick a worse time in the history of my lifetime anyway, to be doing that. So I'm just wondering how we're going to fund this and what impact it's going to have on our citizens. I mean, I love the plan is great. I'm just wondering about how we're going to do that.
Madam Chair, I respond to that. And I think that's the importance of referring this through the financial planning process, because basically Mike has presented this to the budget managers in 1 or 2 meetings to contemplate. The heavy lifting has not yet begun as to what we can actually do to achieve these targets that are proposed. But they are the targets that we're hearing from you that maybe or maybe not quite enough, and something that we feel that we have the capacity to put our minds to and give consideration to the implications. You are right. The implication is either service reductions or increases in costs until such time the investments and changes that we make have ultimate change in the expenditure of these services because they reduce them. So I think the heavy lifting begins today with the adoption of this resolution, and it places the onus upon our budget managers to begin to look at how we will achieve these and then report those out subsequently to the Sewage Commission, the Recreation Commission, as to what those implications will be. And they, as politicians, ultimately will determine whether it's a reduction in service or increase or otherwise, to be mindful of the taxpayers. The other important thing is we haven't had much of a conversation with the public as to these targets or otherwise. And again, this will be a very important financial planning process to introduce these targets and have the buy-in from the public and for them to see the implications and the public see your response and you setting and establishing these targets for us to move forward.
More quick comment on that. So I guess if we send this to the budget process and and it's quite simple to hit 50%, we could raise it to 70 and that would be a great thing. But if it's the other way and it's already in the budget, where does it go from there? Like, how do we go, holy cow, that's like just way more than we can do? What happens if that's the case? Because it's already in the budget. You know, we've already sent it to the budget process. So I'm just, you know, like it's an interesting plan, but it's really hard to get my head around it because the details all coming later. And to me, that's kind of the backwards way to do it. Yeah, I like to have the detail up front so I know what I'm doing. And I realize how hard that would be to do, but it's just, you know, I want to have some clarity as to where this might go.
Yeah, this all will take a lot of work and a lot of analysis to come forward with us to present you with the implications. And that's why give us the targets, give us the direction, and then we come back to you with the implications. And as my comment earlier with regard to solid waste, you need to reach out to those that make the decisions for the services that you provide. It's not you around the table, it's others. So it's important that that be shared and be considered by those that will make the decisions with respect to the Sports Commission, the Sewage Commission, and the Solid Waste Management Board and others as to the implications. Ultimately, a political decision makes the target. Staff do the analysis and present the results, and then you as a political body make the decision as to what's acceptable for your residents in terms of the cost and service implications.
Thanks, Russell. Next, we have Director Hamir.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Mike, for this great report. I love seeing all of the parts coming together, and I hope for those who are reading it, especially members of the public, can see like how interconnected and how well thought out. You know, staff put a lot of time into looking at all the different components. I too am. I do like higher targets as well. So I would support Director Arbor's you know, request if that does come out formally. My one worry is that if that means a delay in action, so the question is, would staff need more time to reconsider projects, or can we start doing, you know, the first list already? So maybe just a comment on if that might delay things.
I don't think it would delay things. I think we would just be doing these projects sooner.
Okay,
Yeah, so we would get more of them done quicker.
great. I have a couple more questions too. As a follow-up to Director Cole Hamilton's comments, I'm glad he caught that the issue around our emissions in the landfill, because it wasn't something that I had even considered as part of this. And now I'm wondering if we have captured our emissions from our liquid waste. So something that you know, we don't have to share with Strathcona, but now that the bioreactors are covered and we have that biojet digestion happening, if we are accounting for the emissions that are coming off, I'm sure there's methane and other lovely things coming off of that digestate, and probably a lot of heat. So question is, if we can also add liquid waste into Director Cole Hamilton's future motion, but I wanted to know a little bit more about the district heat, what that could look like, and is there an option to have something based around our liquid waste site?
Yeah, so the emissions from the wastewater treatment plant are not included in the corporate. They are included in the community inventories, which we're going to get to in a little bit. The heat is reasonably significant from the wastewater, and we have previously looked at heat recovery and district energy opportunities. The problem we found with the wastewater was proximity to something that wants to use that heat. So because of the location of the wastewater treatment plant being in a kind of rural, low density area, there's not a lot of use for the heat out there. And then once you start to distribute that heat to, you know, the hospitals or the colleges, you lose a lot of heat on the way over there. So it was kind of identified as not a great opportunity, but there are other heat and district energy opportunities in the community. And the previous work we've done identified a pretty great opportunity up by the Aquatic Center, Hospital, and North Island College. Now that was several years ago, and we'd need to refresh that. And that is one of the recommendations in this report here. There's a fairly significant demand for heat all tightly clustered together. And so we definitely want to look at heat recovery there. We are also looking at heat recovery within some of our facilities. So a few years ago, we did a heat recovery project at the sports center where we took the heat off the ice plant and used it to heat up the swimming pool and the air. And those are going to continue to be things we look at within facilities as well.
Great, thank you. Next, we have Director Morin.
Great, thank you, Chair, and thanks so much for the first of these reports. Couple things. In the fine print, I noticed that the EV switching to EV was to be 2030, but it's moved up because we're in the process of converting over. And so one of my questions was what's the status on that? Because I think a couple directors reminded me that there were some vehicles on back order, and I'm just thinking that the sooner the better with because I think the purchase of those will make our money back, especially with the price of fuel right now. So just an update on that, and then just another comment. Thanks.
Yeah, so we do have the fleet policy in place now, and we are actively trying to procure electric vehicles. Dustin is spending a lot of time chasing down electric vehicles. We have purchased one recently for our solid waste department, but it is a really big challenge right now to get vehicles, especially the electric ones and the plug-in hybrid ones, and just anything in general. Like we bought a vehicle last May that just showed up this May finally. So that kind of gives you a sense of the supply issues that are out there with the fleet. And to some degree, we're kind of limited by the availability of certain types of vehicles. So cars, not a problem. Well, it's a little bit of a problem, but not a huge problem. SUVs starting to become available. Pickup trucks, not yet. Very soon, hopefully we'll start to see some, but that is a lot of our fleet is pickup trucks and SUVs. And so trying to get those things is especially hard. So it's underway. We have had some success getting some electric vehicles into the fleet recently, but it's still a challenge.
Great. And what is our total fleet currently?
About 50 to 60 vehicles.
Right, and we have
duty.
about 5 right now, EVs?
5 or 6, I can't remember. 5, yeah.
Okay, so ways to go. Well, I guess the good news is that we are working on it now ahead of what was in the timeline. It was interesting, Courtney Council had a marathon meeting around our OCP, among other things. And one of the comments that really stood out to me, which I think applies here, is that there's a cost to inaction. There's a cost to doing nothing or to delaying. And I think that's important for us to remember that to factor that in. And it's not always easy to measure, but I think it is something that we need to consider. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, we have Director Arbour.
Thanks for allowing me to go a second time. I think I have a couple points to make and maybe a suggestion at the end, but I think Director Grant was on cue in talking about, the cost impact, which of course will be top of mind. And he's right that the regional district is a cost driver for municipalities, but I also point out that the regional district has done a great job the last 4 years of keeping our rate of inflation lower than that of many jurisdictions around us. So I think it's a matter, there's a third way that the CEO didn't talk about, decreased levels, increased cost. The third way is really to do things differently. And in the sense that, okay, so if I look at the 7 years I've had my leaf, right, it was a bigger item at the cost from a capital cost perspective. But 7 years later, have probably saved overall, both capital and operation, about 10 grand, when you include fuel costs and the rest of that. So there are choices that you make. So for example, when we bought the Zamboni, the electric Zamboni at the arena, it was a little more at the point of purchase. That resulted in 100% reduction in the operation of the vehicle, right? And we are saving on the price of the fuel. And that kind of analysis, even when you do buildings or retrofits like that, for me, that's where the big wins will be, is where you can save on the operation because the technology is that much better, right? And you have the carbon saving. Those are the kind of dilemmas that we can look at. Overall, I think Dr. Grant is right. We're not going to increase taxes by 20% to fund a plan, but I think the transformative aspect is to think completely differently, including, do we need this new asset? So I guess that would be reduced service level in this case, or not creating additional service. And I did want to show a bit of support for Dr. Cole Hamilton, and maybe, this board is the corporate board. So I think it's like Canada and the provinces in regards to our commissions and services. If we set a target and impose a target that from now on this board expect the Comox Strathcona Waste Management Commission to include methane, and I think Mark Rutten could probably speak more about the dilemma we have there in terms of how we're accounting for it, or not. And if this board is not satisfied, or wants to put a mandate and bound the solid waste management plan with targets set by the corporate board, we are like Canada to our commissions. We can literally say, this is what you must do, right? So, and I agree with Dr. Cole Hamilton. I think that not including those emissions doesn't make sense, and is basically, especially if he's correct in his math, which again, maybe Mark could comment on, that it's the largest single source of emissions. I think this board is in his right to ask questions about that and to frame that and pass policy that binds the work of the commission. And in a sense, we are doing it with B3, where we say implement decarbonization plan for the CVRD recreation facilities, right? This was not discussed at the Rec Commission, but we're saying we'd like you to go there. So that's my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Hillian.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, staff. I would be interested in hearing from staff on the relationship between this board and the Comox Strathcona Waste Management Board. I'm not sure if they're subservient to us or whether it's more a matter of us perhaps mandating those directors who sit at the board to take a certain course of action there. But that's not really what I wanted to speak about. We were in this chamber last night debating the City of Courtenay's official community plan. And one of the aspects that we really benefited from was the engagement of a Citizens Advisory Committee. And we had considerable discussion over whether or not we wanted to see some type of continuation of a committee of that nature to be involved in implementation of that official community plan, which has ambitious targets and goals in relation to climate, as well as all sorts of other aspects of living in our community. So to me, it's a theme that runs throughout the reports that we have here tonight, that we need substantial buy-in from our community in order to move forward with this, and in no less area than the one that Director Grant highlights of how much citizens are willing to pay. If we believe that we're in a climate crisis and that we can't continue with business as usual, then to me it's inevitable that we cannot maintain the same standard of living without paying a higher cost for it. And we want to pay that higher cost in terms of either taxes or in reduction of our quality of life. Those are some of the choices that, excuse me, that I think we need to make. And I would add to that if we have a way of engaging the citizens of our community in some sort of a formal way, not only do we increase the chances of buy-in through a representative group that has the ability to reach out to various segments of the community, but we have the added benefit of the innovation and the ideas, the creative energy that that type of a body would bring. So it is referenced in some of the other reports before us tonight, and I'm just wondering if staff have any thoughts about whether or not we have the capacity and the will to have a substantial citizen engagement in the process of implementing these various reports. Thanks.
Through Madam Chair to the directors. Thanks for indulging that little huddle Mike and I just did, but I think we agree with you. I think we see a need for buy-in at all levels. So around this table, other elected officials and decision makers, our community, staff, you know, within the CBRD, staff within the municipalities. I think in respect to engaging citizens for those good reasons you flagged, the buy-in, but also the innovation. I see a direct link to some of the work that Daphne will be speaking to around the community emissions piece. And then I would also say, not that this is the panacea, but if you opt to look at the RGS in 2023, I think that would be a good forum to create some opportunities for citizen engagement. Those are the two pieces I would suggest in response.
Okay, thank you. And we're back to Director Cole-Hamilton.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. I just wanted to maybe put a bit of context to my suggested resolution. Is my understanding from looking at the staff report is the reason we're not addressing the landfill gas issue is it's not because we don't have the authority to, but it's because of this ruling in or guidance in 2007 that the province said we didn't need to unless we wish to. And I also took guidance from the staff report where it says if the CBRD is serious about its commitment to climate change, it should consider recognizing all GHG emissions that are within its operational control. And that's exactly what I'm suggesting that we do. I think we are serious here, and I think my math is quite good. I think our emissions are less than 2,000 tons per year, and the landfill is attributed to 30,000 tons per year attributed to that. So it's roughly 15 times our total annual emissions. So I note also, of course, in this report that we do address solid waste management and its emissions as part of this plan. So it's just one particular slice of their emissions that we haven't considered. And that's, I guess, the reasoning I had behind thinking that it would make sense to bring all of their emissions under this umbrella rather than just some of them.
Okay, thank you. Director Morin.
Thank you, Chair. There was something I'd forgotten to mention earlier, and that was around woven through these reports the information around creating business plans or arguments for some of these actions. And I think that's maybe where we'll see, I guess, some more layers of rationale and how we're going to offset some of those costs down the road. I mean, perfect example obviously is more cars off the road, less maintenance on the roads, less wear and tear on the roads. That's going to save a ton of money right there. So I think having those details as we go forward with those business plans, and also what isn't mentioned so much in the report is around the evaluation and piece. And I think that's obviously extremely important as well. Like if whatever we're implementing, how are we measuring the effect of that? And we know that not everything is quantitative, and we need to be able to measure the qualitative data as well. So I think that's something that I'd like to see kind of fleshed out a little bit more in what we're doing as well. Thanks. And maybe staff has a comment around that I've missed or something. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that as part of that work we need to do is to look at the business cases and develop the internal cost of carbon policy, which to some degree would reflect those costs of the less maintenance or the benefit, I guess, of less maintenance on the roads. There's cost and there's also a benefit from these things that we might do, and there are other not so quantitative benefits that are important as well. So yeah, that'll be part of that work.
Okay, thank you. So we are on the first report of 6, I believe. So we'll try to move along. I don't think we actually got a first and second for receipt of this report. Leanne Narber, thank you. And to move us along, we'll call the question on receipt. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. Okay, and there is a recommendation. McCullum and Cole-Hamilton. Is there any further discussion? And it's above the full board. Oh, Director Hamir?
Yeah, I was just wondering if there was support for the changing the target, the first item from 50 to 70. I'll make that as an amendment and see if there's enough support around the table.
Is there a second? Okay, and Director Arbor seconded. So there's an amended motion that we reduce the corporate greenhouse gas emissions. The amendment would be from 50% to 70% below the 2019 emissions. Any further discussion?
So I'm just wondering from staff what the implications of that are. Is it reasonable to do or not? I didn't get an answer when I said is 50% a reasonable number or not, and so I still don't know the answer.
Yeah. We've presented to you a reasonable recommendation that I know our staff can deliver on, 50%, and developing a plan through the financial planning process. 70% is not something that I've discussed with our staff in terms of their capacity. Definitely is more work. It's a higher target and they'll have to dig deeper. The regional district has a ton of work on its plate right now, initiatives that are taking a lot of staff time and initiative based on your financial plan that you adopted for 2023. I think we would come back to you and maybe ask you to reconsider this if we can't deliver on 70%, if that's what you're doing, and present to you the options of how we would achieve that work as opposed to other things that are currently on our table. So give us the direction that you see fit, and I'll come back to you and say how we can accomplish that. If it's 70, it might mean dropping other things off the table in order for us to accomplish this and get it done reasonably.
Thank you. Okay, Director Arbor speaking to the amendment.
Yeah, thanks to Dr. Amir for putting that on the table. Yeah, I understand, like, and I think Dr. Grant is right. What was missing actually today on hindsight is staff aware whether we had a target to 2020 or 2022? Like, because Mike talked about how we've had a corporate emissions plan. So I don't want it to be a downer because we're trying to be climate optimists, but it relates to the question as does it matter, the target? So for me, a higher target really forces us into going the extra mile, as our CEO think, and really make this a priority. I realize we're end of term. It could kind of bind the next board. And perhaps I'm a question to staff. If we were to adopt the 70% target, how binding is that in our financial decisions from year to year? So if you look at the last 10 years, did we have a 2020 target? Did we just completely ignore it and went about financial planning with this as a background policy that floats out there? Or do you believe that us passing any, whether 50 or 70%, will actually result in action by 2030?
Madam Chair, ultimately it comes down to the resolve and will of the directors at the table that make the decisions that are required to follow through on targets.
Thank you. Next we have Director Grieve.
Thanks, Madam Chair. There's a saying, less haste, more speed. I think that sometimes if you're going to be overreaching on these goals, it's going to make a lot of people disillusioned because they're unattainable. And I would say that because we're not the only local government or senior government even, grappling with this right now. You talk about supply chain issues, you talk about 2.5 years to get $120,000 F-150 pickup. I mean, you can only move so fast. And if you set, Soviet style 5-year plan goals, you're just going to disillusion a lot of people. And I always say we got to bring everybody along on this. We have to make sure everybody's on board. If this goes the other way, then there's going to be, as there always is in politics, there's going to be a pushback. And chances are that when the pendulum swings the other way, it could undo a lot of the gains you made and even reverse them. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Hillian speaking to the amendment.
Thanks, Chair. I would have preferred the amendment to ask staff to come back to us with the implications of setting a higher target in more detail, as opposed to simply setting that target. I used to work with a fellow who, when we talked about the increasing demands that, in this case, the province who I worked for made on its employees, He used to say, yes, I'll do that, but what do you want me to give up that I'm doing now? And that's essentially what our CAO has just said. So I don't feel comfortable voting on this without getting a really clear picture of what we're being asked to give up. If in fact we ask our staff to work harder to address these targets. Thanks.
And just going back to staff, if this motion went through today with the 70%, staff would be bringing back the implications of both the 50 and the 70.
What I propose is if you adopt the amendment and it's 70%, I'm going to have to go back to our managers and just say, how do we make this possible? How do we undertake this work to accomplish this objective? And then I would come back to you and say, hey, there are some implications to this that you might be mindful of, and I might need your direction on. So I think, I'm going to come back to you about the implications of this, whether you refer it for my input or not. It's significant enough that I'll be advising you one way or the other within a month's time.
Okay, thank you. Director McCollum, speaking to the amendment.
Thanks, Chair. I'll be brief to move things along here. Yeah, I share some hesitations around picking the 70% number. Certainly, both in this country and globally, that we have a history of picking targets that are not met. And really this plan begins in 2023. So that's 7 years for 70% reduction. To me, I can't even wrap my head around what the difference of operations and what kind of projects we would be talking about in such a short amount of time to see that I would prefer that we perhaps ask staff to possibly highlight some other opportunities and what those costs would be rather than focusing on the 70%. Just because I want this to be something that we adhere to and that the public believes in and that future board believes in. And I'm not sure that a 70% target is achievable. I think that a lot of work and time and effort went into the 50%, and another 20 I'm not sure about. So I don't think I'll be supporting the amendment.
Okay, I'll go to Mike.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, we have a report coming up about our community emissions and thinking about our staff time and where we spend it. We're talking about 1,500 to 2,000 tons corporately versus, at least in the rural areas, close to 250,000 tons. So just some perspective on where our staff spend their time, if it's the corporate ones versus the community ones.
Thanks for that. Director Arbour, speaking to the amendment.
Yeah, thanks. One last kind of hoorah for the 70%. And I would love it if we actually got an answer prior to voting on this, on the methane, because to be honest, 20% increase to the overall, if we tackle the what sounds like 15 times the rest of our operation with the methane issue at the landfill, that's quite achievable by 2030 if we bring in the technology that will reduce that by even maybe 5%. So what I mean is, I'd be curious to know if I'd like to confirm if Dr. Cole-Hamilton's math is correct, and if we can hear from engineering, who I know I've spoken about the topic at CSWM before, and our CEO did tell us, set the target, right? We have a report that proposes 50%, which is the IPCC kind of go-to figure for the solid B+, which is really good. But you also say set the target, so I would still vote in favor of a higher target. I believe the technology, we're not 12 years ago, like there's going to be so many changes and we can be a leader in those changes.
Thanks. Going back to Mike.
Yeah, just to confirm, the methane emissions from the landfill is about 30,000 tons per year. So just clarifying that.
So that was accurate. Director Cole-Hamilton, speaking to the amendment.
Thank you so much, Chair. I'm also mindful that staff capacity is not infinite. We have a lot of things that we want to get done. And I certainly, as I said, I think that the methane from the land, if I had to choose between trying to shoot for 70% on 1,500 to 2,000 tons versus getting a good handle on 30,000 tons, I think I'd know where I'd want my staff hours to go. And I do, if there were a way of presenting options which was not unduly onerous on staff, so we could look at just what it takes to do 50 versus 70, then I would support it. But if that came at the cost of other work, like the work that I really do believe needs to be done on the methane emissions, then I'd have trouble supporting that. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think it would be hard to set the target and then walk it back at a future date if we have information that is counter to that. So we are voting on the amendment, and I don't see any further lights. Okay, yeah, staff will put it up for us. And our CAO did say that he would be coming back with the information about a higher target, whether we pass the amendments or the regular motion. So the amendment is, the amendment is there at the bottom to replace the 50 with the 70% reduction of emissions. Okay, so I'll call the question. All in favor of the amendment? That's 3. And opposed? Okay, the motion's defeated. And so we're back to the regular motion of 50% reduction of emissions. Director Cole-Hamilton.
Thanks, Chair. So I was just going to propose that amendment that I'd spoken of earlier. So I would just like to propose an addendum that we instruct staff to prepare an addendum to the Climate, Energy and Emissions Report, which addresses the fugitive gas emissions from Comox SWM operated facilities.
Okay, it's seconded by Arbor. Any further discussion on the amendment? I guess we'll wait for staff to put it up. Oh, go ahead, Director Hillian.
Thanks, Chair. Can we hear from staff on just whether that is doable and gives them an effective tool to achieve?
If I could just comment when I see Lisa having written it up here.
Do you just want to read it then? Sure. It's a lot to write, so at least it's just going to read it out.
Anyway. Do you want to hand it to me and I can comment?
The bottom, starting at this part. Bottom, starting at this part.
It begins. Sorry, Russell, I wasn't expecting to head off with word
Okay, thank you. The recommendation is that we prepare a report that affects the Solid Waste Management Board. It would be my advice that you refer that to the Solid Waste Management Board to give staff direction, because traditionally they are the ones that give direction to us with respect to solid waste matters. And I say that in the interest of honoring and recognizing the authority for decision-making with respect to the operations or otherwise of the service.
Director Hillian.
Thanks, Chair. So I think it would be more effective if we either withdrew or defeated the amendment and then moved it as a separate motion to refer this issue to the Solid Waste Management Board.
Okay, Director Arbor to the amendment.
Yeah, thanks. I am in favor of the amendment, and I think what I heard our CEO say is traditionally that is the path, and as supported by Director Hillian, to gently refer. But with a big board like that, I have no problem putting that in our plan and as an addendum. And basically this is corporate policy. I haven't heard that we are not allowed to do that.
Thank you. Okay, so we're just finishing putting up the amendment. I don't see any further lights. So I will call the question. All in favor? Anyone opposed? 3 opposed? Oh, Director Grant, 4,
Yeah, it's gonna open a can of worms.
and I'm in favor. Sorry, I'm in favor. Okay. So the motion carries. So we are,
Madam Chair, I would like to, maybe this is a recommendation after you receive the amended motion. I'll comment after you consider the overall motion. Thanks.
okay. Yeah, so we've all already gone back to the amended motion now. The motion as amended, yes. And so is there any further discussion on the motion as amended? Okay, so I'll call the question. All in favor? And opposed? None? Okay, that's carried unanimously.
Madam Chair, my advice would be that this board refer this report and ask Mike to present it to the Solid Waste Management Board, including the recommendation adopted tonight for their consideration.
Hillian and Hamir, thank you. Any further discussion about the referral to the Solid Waste Management Board? Okay, all in favor? Anyone opposed? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. So we're moving on to report 2 of 6. And that is the CVRD electoral areas greenhouse gas emissions inventory. Arbor and Hillian, thank you. And we'll pass it to Steph.
Thank you, Chair. Through the chair to the board, the purpose of this report is to present to you the CVRD's electoral areas greenhouse gas inventory for the base year 2018. So this inventory provides a greenhouse gas emissions profile for the electoral areas, and this could be developed into a broader inventory and to include other CVRD members. It is a comprehensive inventory and aims to capture all of the community greenhouse gas emissions. And it is an important endeavor as it responds to the climate crisis. It is also important for us to do this because it is one of our commitments to work towards measuring community-wide greenhouse gas emissions under the Climate Action Charter. And it also provides us with some local accurate data on the emissions. And it also helps us determine where we could focus on reducing emissions depending on our the areas where we have the opportunity and ability to do so. So for the inventory, we used the GPC, sorry, I'm still here. So we used the GPC protocol. So we use this framework, which is used within other municipalities for conducting community-wide greenhouse gas emission inventories. It is a robust framework, and there are many other local governments that have used it. It has two levels, the basic and the basic plus. We conducted this inventory using the basic plus level, and it also is international recognized, and it also provides for uniformity in reporting community-wide greenhouse gas emissions, and it also adheres to the IPCC guidelines. So this is an overview of the inventory. So there's 5 key sectors here, and that's transportation, waste, stationary energy, agricultural, forestry, and other land use, and industrial processes, and other product use. So the GBC categorizes emissions into 3 scopes depending on where they physically occur. And scope 1 looks at the sources that are located within the jurisdictional boundary. Scope 2 looks at grid supplied electricity and electricity or heat, steam or cooling. And then scope 3 considers all other greenhouse gas emissions that occur outside jurisdictional boundaries, which would be such as transportation and solid waste. So the total amount for the emissions for that was generated in this inventory for the electoral areas, it was 245,626 metric tons. This slide is just showing, again, it breaks down these the key sources of emissions. So we have our 5 sectors, and within these 5 sectors, there are other emission sources. This graphic shows the top sources. It doesn't show a comprehensive view of all of them. Those are in the report. And as you can this gives us a snapshot of what's going on in the community in terms of emissions. This is a comprehensive overview. So the 2 tables show some of the examples of some of the climate action projects that are underway and potential projects that we can look into relating to the sectors in the inventory as well as the sources. So we already have some initiatives underway, and for the top key sectors, transportation, stationary energy, and waste, we have many initiatives there already, because those are the also key areas of climate action initiatives. And then potential ones could include other transportation initiatives, as well as creating compact communities in relation to land use. So our next steps, now that we have this inventory, is we're hoping to work together with member municipality staff so we can create a comprehensive inventory. This would also require staff committing to some time for data acquisition and to just provide us access to municipal data. And for outreach, we would also look into some community outreach related to these emissions. And then we would also want to continue reporting on these emissions to see how successful our current initiatives are, and also identify opportunities for other initiatives. So undertaking this community-wide inventory has been a really big step for us, and it gives us a clearer picture of where we can focus our efforts within our sphere of influence, and how we can measure emissions and continually monitor some of our initiatives. So thank you.
Great, thank you. We do have some questions. Director Hamir, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Stephanie, for the report. You know, I think some of the numbers are pretty shocking, so I'm still kind of digesting how high our community level emissions are. So a couple of questions around, you know, I think I just quickly added up the emissions out of the agricultural sector. It looks like it's about 80,000 metric ton or megatons. And you know, again, going back to that, what can we as a regional district do to influence that? I understand that the Investment Agriculture Foundation is now funding 3 climate-related best management practices to reduce GHG emissions. And I'm wondering if staff could comment on whether or not our new agricultural coordinator could support the community in enacting some of those reductions. Is that is there room in the work plan for that that position? So that's one question, if that's possible.
Through Madam Chair to the directors. As Director Hamir has noted, we have an agricultural coordinator whom we've enlisted to help us out with a lot of our liaison work with the agricultural community. And we also have an agricultural plan update underway. And so one of the tasks within that plan work is indeed to look at opportunities to mitigate the impacts of climate change on the agricultural sector. So that's some work that our consultants are doing, but it will be a big part of our community outreach to understand what would be involved for some of our agriculturalists to be able to respond to some of the emerging technologies, but also to really understand their needs around how do we balance that piece around food security, local economic development, and reducing emissions. So I think it's an important conversation to have with the folks who are growing our food and to support them in the work that they do, but also to help where there is room to enable these innovations to be developed locally. And I think certainly our agricultural coordinator, in addition to our consultants, is well positioned to help us with that liaison work and understanding the needs.
Thank you. Dr. Arbor.
Thanks. I'll be brief on this one, saving time from the other item earlier, but because we respect the authority of other commissions, and obviously I'm in support of passing this on to the Electoral Area Services Committee for consideration. I'm also in favor of aggregating with the municipalities. Hopefully the municipalities are here in favor. I haven't heard too much about the status of their inventory emission. And I guess the meaty conversation we'll have at ESC, Dr. Hamir already spoke about, but when I think about your example around agriculture, I'm thinking about what's the current greenhouse gas emission footprint of the 94% of our food that comes from off of Vancouver Island in relation to growing our sector here. So I think if we're trying to grow, say, by another 60, 70% over time to relocalize food, how can we shape the direction of the emissions that will be related to that new production from agriculture? The low-hanging fruit would be in our bylaws, we could ban new livestock farms, for example. Oh, did I just say that in a public record? But that's an example if you're greenhouse gas emission driven and that's your sole focus and not other consideration. The report is pretty clear as to where the emissions come from. So yeah, that will make for great conversation at ESC. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any further comments. Oh, Director Hamir, go ahead.
I need to comment to that because I hope, you know, our members of the public are watching this and it will get back to the community, that there are practices in the livestock sector that are actually climate mitigating. So I hope this board isn't considering us banning livestock in any shape or form in the future, but we're helping to transition practices to be more in line with GHG, which there are, and it's lovely to see. So just needed to make that comment. Thanks.
And of course, greenhouse gases are not the only consideration. You know, food security and economic development, all those very important things are part of our decision-making process. Okay, So, Director Grave, go ahead.
Yes, thanks very much. My question is about the upland resource areas and the private forest lands. As you know, we have no purview over that. So I don't know how it made its way into this report.
Staff want to respond?
Through the chair to Director Grieve. This report serves as a purpose to provide a comprehensive overview of what's going on in the community for all emission sources. It's not a prescriptive report. However, it's just showing where emissions are coming from.
And I think it's good that we see the huge impact that the forestry industry does have on greenhouse emissions. That's not the only impact it has on our communities, but certainly a big one. And I think that's also, why and where we can do a lot of advocacy work with the province. Okay. So I don't see any further lights, and we are on receipt of the electoral areas greenhouse gas emissions inventory. All in favor of receipt? Anyone opposed? That's carried. Hillian has moved the recommendation, seconded by Arbor. Is there any further discussion about the recommendation? Director Grave.
Thank you very much. Just a timeline when this will be coming back.
Over to staff.
Because we're running out of time. As you know, runway is disappearing.
I believe Summer will be looking into this as part of the projects.
Okay. That's coming up very fast. Okay. So we still are on receipt. I'll call the question. Oh, sorry. Yes, on the recommendation. Thank you. And I don't see any further lights, so I'll call the question on the recommendation. All in favor? Anyone opposed? And that's carried unanimously. Thank you. We're on to the corporate carbon neutral update. Arbor and Cole Hamilton, thank you. And Alana.
Great, thank you very much, Chair Kettler. Daphne Mazarura will lead us through this report.
Thank you, Alana. Through Madam Chair to the board. The next report is to present the CVRD carbon neutral, to update you on our carbon neutral status. So the CVRD has been carbon neutral in our corporate operations since 2012. And just to refresh and go back, I understand you may know all of this already. They have measured emissions, reduced and offset where necessary, and reported on these neutral updates in to comply with the BC Climate Action Charter. It's very important for us to stay carbon neutral and to measure our emissions because it demonstrates leadership. It also provides for better decision makings for our other initiatives, including the corporate energy plan, and it also provides access to climate action financing, as we have done in the past with the CARIB program, and more recently, the local government climate action program. Sorry. So just to highlight the differences between the two types of inventories, I know I started with the community inventory and the corporate inventory. The framework we use for reporting our corporate emissions is the traditional services inventory, and this framework makes us recommends that we report on these emissions according to the key services that are provided by local governments. And these are highlighted on the list. And the ones that grayed out are the ones that we don't provide within our within the CVRD. So the corporate inventory also accounts for only accounts for emissions that are directly under municipal control. The community inventory looks at emissions within the community, which includes the corporate inventory. So the community inventory that was presented earlier on will include the corporate inventory. So this is a snapshot of our emissions from 2020. The key takeaways from this are that show us that direct fuel combustion had the highest source of emissions, and it also shows a trend that during the summer months, there's less emissions from direct fuel combustions, which could be attributed to heating of facilities. Another key takeaway shows that solid waste management, recreation are two of the highest sources of emissions. However, this is also typical of local governments. Many local governments, these are the two highest emission sources. Also, the solid waste management within this inventory framework measures solid waste transportation, diversion, and collection. It doesn't consider the emissions of the landfill itself. The emissions of the landfill are accounted for in the community-wide emissions. So that's the key difference as well. And then also another takeaway from this 2020 overview is that there were higher emissions during the times where there was no lockdown, sorry. So as you can see, during COVID times, there were less emissions associated with that. And again, for 2021, our emissions are trends are very similar to those from the year before. Maybe the key difference again here is that COVID related, as lockdown measures were loosened, then emissions increased after that. So 2021 shows this total of 1,727,000 metric tons. 2020, there was 1,680 metric tons of emissions. So steadily rising in 2021, and we anticipate that this will also increase in 2022. So our next steps, staff are recommending the purchase of 3,507 metric tons. And we are also recommending that these offsets be purchased from the thermal residential aggregation project. Our reason for recommending the thermal residential aggregation project is that this will enable adequate funding for local climate action. And this has been done in the past, and we can see we did that last year with the Road to 2030 Climate Action Challenge, where we were able to finance community projects and that would catalyze further community actions. And also, it also enables us to access additional funding for climate-related projects, such as the Local Government Climate Action Program. Another key step is to continue to report on these emissions through our RGS Hub, our website, and following the requirements for the local government action plan. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Daphne. Are there any questions on the purchase of the carbon credits? Director Hamir.
Just a question around the price, the $11 per megaton. I mean, we just had a long conversation about 160 per megaton. So how did we come to 11?
Through the chair to Director Hamir, the price was it was reduced because of the amount with the brokers. If you have a higher purchase, they do reduce the prices. So that's how we got a lower price for that.
Oh, I see. Okay, so we're basing this on what carbon's being sold for outside. Well, I'm wondering if that doesn't kind of get us off the hook for a lot more. I mean, if I'm still not understanding how come this is not falling under our 160. I don't know if staff can explain the difference between these two.
I think I'll let Mike speak to that one. I'll let Mike speak to that.
Yeah, thanks. So the $160 per ton is an internal cost of carbon that we would use in a number of ways for decision making, doing those business case analysis. Not kind of different than our carbon offset purchases. So we need to do a little bit of work between now and the financial plan to kind of understand how we use that internal cost of carbon. Right now, what we're trying to do is just achieve that carbon neutral status. And we have been doing that for many years through the purchase of carbon offsets. Slowly, we're going to probably phase that out and maybe chase the reductions more aggressively. But for now, that's the best and cheapest way to achieve our carbon neutral status. And these are carbon offsets that are available on the market, like you said. And there's it's like a stock market. There's a variety of stocks we can buy, and their prices vary depending on the nature of the projects. So that's kind of what's setting the price of these particular carbon offsets at $11 per ton. So they're similar, but a little bit different than the internal cost of carbon that we would be applying moving forward.
Thank you. Dr. Cole Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And thanks for the report. I was just recalling that I think at solid waste we used Cowichan Energy Alternatives, which is an island-based offsetter, which sort of put together small projects. And while I'm very happy with the report, and I'm really happy to see I think the Great Bear Rainforest one was obviously a BC-based option. I was just curious as to whether the Cowichan alternative being considered, and if there's any particular reason why it wasn't here.
Through Madam Chair to the Director. So at our last inquiry, the Cowichan Alternative Energy didn't have credits for us to purchase.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so we're on receipt of the carbon neutral update. Oh, Director Hillian, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. Just on the last point, do we foresee a day when there might be a project closer to home that actually does provide carbon credits? I know we're hoping to move away from that, but it certainly would be more desirable if we had something closer to home, just building on Councillor Cole Hamilton's point.
Through the chair to Director Hillian. Yes, we did look into that with Mike as well, and there are some potential projects we could look at from Mosaic, right? And unfortunately, they haven't been verified yet. So that was why we couldn't go ahead and purchase that, but that we were interested in that because that would be a local project closer to home.
Thank you. And maybe there's opportunity to partner with Mosaic if they do get the accreditations and yeah, save some forest land. Okay, Director Arbor.
Yeah, and I think maybe Mike will correct me or give me the nod if I'm wrong, but you know, the Fed has got targets around the cost carbon credit. I think Mosaic's basing their models on up to $150 a ton in 10 years from now. So that starts to be really appealing. On the forestry side, you know, Great Bear is another one. There's a few in BC, but those prices were set really low initially. Like the Chickamus Community Forest you could buy for $25 a ton when they released it 10 years ago. But with the carbon credit market going up, it's nice to hear staff say, whereas our game the last 10 years was to, you know, find those carbon offset, our game is to actually get off of them and realize those emissions internally as much as possible. I don't think we have enough emissions. Maybe that's a question to staff, but could we get accredited ourselves for some of the initiatives that we may undertake? I mean, the cost of accreditation is pretty high, but I'm just wondering if that's been looked at, if it's totally far-fetched to think that an organization like us could actually monetize some of the aggressive reduction that we will pursue.
Yeah, it's a big process to get verification for the offsets, but we could pursue those for certain projects. I'm thinking of the RDN. They've actually done that with their landfill gas emissions. So I believe that was one of the projects that we were considering purchasing in the past. So it's definitely something we could do. As a big process. There's a lot of consultant dollars that would be required to do the verification. It would probably only make sense for a larger project, maybe such as one at the landfill that could generate a significant amount of revenue.
Just a follow. Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, so just to make it really clear to everyone is basically what Dr. Cole Hamilton has said is, let's try to address that giant in the room of 30,000 tons. And what RDN did was monetize that into a carbon offset product. So not only they reduce their emissions, but they also are currently making money because it is voluntary. It was not mandated by the province or federal government. That makes tackling that project even more interesting. Is the scale similar? Was it about 30,000 tons for RDN or? Sorry, I'm going in the weeds, but that's my final question.
I mean, I'm not sure exactly, but I would imagine they're on a generally similar scale or magnitude. I'm not sure exactly though, but yeah, definitely tens of thousands of tons down there at their landfill.
So there is potential there. Okay, so we are on receipt. I don't see any further lights. I'll call the question. All in favor of receipt? Anyone opposed? That's unanimous. There's a recommendation. McCullum and Grieve, thank you. Is there any further discussion on the recommendation? Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. And how does the board feel? Do we need a break? 5 minute? Oh, there's dinner, so we'll maybe take 10 minutes then. Thank you. Okay. Coming back. We'll sort of work through dinner here. Thank you. So next we have the Local Government Climate Action Program launch. Arbor and Hamir, thank you. And I believe it's Robin Holm who's going to speak to this report. Great, thanks so much.
Through the chair to the directors, I'm here today to speak to you about the Local Government Climate Action Program. We brought this item to you today because it was just recently announced on May 16th that this new funding would be available to local governments. This is a bit of a new version of the CARET program that was canceled last year, and it's been reimagined under the Roadmap to 2030, as well as the Climate Preparedness and Adaptation Strategy. The province has dedicated a large sum of money that's going to be allocated to local governments in order to fund local climate initiatives. The program requirements are very similar to what was required for the CARET. And this includes a public attestation of how the funding will be dedicated to climate action. We will have to report out on how the projects align to Roadmap to 2030 or the Climate Preparedness Adaptation Strategy, which is in draft stage right now. And we also have to show how we are matching about 20% of the funds that we receive from this program and how we're putting this towards this project. And we also have to report out on our corporate GHG emissions. Staff suggests that we are well positioned to deliver on the program requirements as we've been reporting, we've been participating with the CARET program, and we have already prepared our corporate GHG emissions. Staff also attended an introductory webinar last week where we heard all about the program and the reporting requirements. And with quick timelines, the reporting period opens June 15th and closes closes July 15th, and funds will be dispersed on August 31st. Once staff have completed and submitted all of the program requirements, the CVRD will receive $123,082 in funding that can be allocated, and staff suggests to an internal climate reserve in order to support local climate initiatives. And we do not have any concerns with meeting these requirements within the existing resources. I'm happy to answer any questions about the program.
Great, thanks, Robin. Yeah, so we would continue to measure our corporate greenhouse gas emissions. We would need to match a minimum of 20% of the total funding, and we would need to publicly report on it. So that's not too hard for us to meet. Any further comments, questions? Oh, Director Hamir, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. And thanks, Robin. I think the timing of the announcement was great. I don't know how they did that in conjunction with all the work that staff are doing. So fantastic. I did sit in a webinar through Climate Caucus where they explained a little bit about how the funding can be used. It sounded like their funding could be used to hire someone to help with the tracking of GHGs, as well as maybe some of the projects that have been, we've talked about earlier. So I'm wondering if staff have put their mind to how potentially that 120,000+ would be put to use. Do you have an idea of staffing versus projects?
Through Madam Chair to the Director, Director Hamir, that's one of the first places that our mind went, was how do we support the take up on a lot of this work and helping the departments to accelerate their actions and come up with these business plans. So what we'd like to do, as Robin said, this is sort of hot off the press. We'd like to think about this a little bit and then come back to you through that financial planning process upcoming and talk to you about how those funds could be used to meet the objectives.
Great, thank you. Okay, Robin, thanks for the report. I don't see any, oh, I do see one more. Director McCullough?
Yeah, just curious what the difference in funding is with this new program versus our old funding, if you have that figure handy.
Through the chair to Director McCullum, sorry, I'd just like to clarify, do you mean from the CARET reporting?
Yeah,
The
from
funding?
CARET.
Well, this is just a lot more money that is being, that has been provided to this program as it's a dedicated source annual for the next 3 years. So should we continue to submit and complete our reporting, we can expect to receive close to this amount, if not the same.
And sorry, I don't know off the top of my head, but what were we receiving under the CARET programming previously? Just ballpark is fine. 30.
I believe Alana is looking for that amount, but I can.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
What I can give you is an example of the difference in terms for a typical small city. For Carib, a small city would have received around 39,000. And compared to that, through this program, that same city would receive 121,000.
Okay, yeah.
So it's a much larger amount. And what I heard was that they listened to all of the feedback they received at UBCM, and this was responding to that. And they advocated to be able to dedicate these large sums of money, trying to really respond to the fact that local governments were wanting to take more action.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Robin. And we're on receipt. All in favor of receipt? Anyone opposed? That's carried. There's no recommendation. So we move on to the next report, which is Transition 2050 Residential Retrofit Market Acceleration Next Steps. Barbara and Grant, thank you. And I'll pass it to staff.
Through the chair and to the directors, I will be presenting on this today, but I also just wanted to note that Peter Sundberg from City Green Solutions is also on the line, and he is here and available to answer any questions if you have any after the presentation.
Okay, welcome, Peter. Thanks.
So as you probably all recall, in September 2020, staff brought forward the residential retrofit market acceleration strategy. This was a key deliverable from the Transition 2050 project, and it provided us with key insights into our community and the challenges we face when trying to accelerate energy transitions in order to meet our GHG emission reduction targets. We learned that oil and gas account for 71% of all of the residential emissions in the valley from roughly 26,000 homes, with oil being the largest of the two fossil fuels. We learned also that cost is a significant barrier to many when considering energy upgrade retrofits. And we heard here at the board that this is a big concern for a lot of you. Heat pumps often require higher upfront investment when upgrading versus a natural gas heating system. And sometimes an electrical service panel is required. All of this makes it out of reach for many households, including lower income families and tenants. The rebate process can also be quite complex and overwhelming, and many people are unaware of what programs are available and their eligibility. Framed by federal, provincial, RGS, and retrofit targets, the strategy identified priority actions to accelerate retrofit upgrades. And since 2020, staff have been working to advance the strategy through various implementation actions. And some of these actions include promoting the Clean BC's Double the Rebate program, which was a time-limited offer from roughly 2020 to 2021, where double the rebates were available as high as $6,000 for fuel switching. The CRD also co-hosted a heat pump called Considering a Heat Pump. We co-hosted this with the RDN, and we attracted a wide audience from community members as well as people in the industry. And as well, staff have been seeking grant funding to renew our annual participation in the Clean BC Municipal Top-Up Program, all of which have contributed to a healthy rebate uptake of 108 fuel switches to heat pumps in 2021. And this is in the Comox Valley, compared to the provincial uptake of 987. So that shows you that we're actually making progress here in our valley. And province-wide, this is also hot off the press, Clean BC Better Homes fuel switching uptake in the fiscal 2021 to 2022 has tripled relative to the fiscal 2021 year. So this data really does show us that incentive programs are proving to be effective at accelerating energy transitions and then overall reducing our GHG emissions. The province and Clean BC have been investing heavily in developing the rebate offering, and this is also further supported by the Clean BC's roadmap to 2030. And for example, I'm just going to talk about a couple of new programs that are just new to offering as of this year. In February, the province launched the Income Qualified Program, and this is a new rebate that is trying to make energy retrofits more affordable and homes more energy efficient. The program eligibility is based on household income and offers a streamlined rebate application, essentially a concierge process. This is based on eligibility, and based on eligibility, the program could cover up to 60 to 95% of total energy retrofit upgrade costs. For example, a heat pump could be covered up to $9,500. Clean BC has now provided larger rebate amounts that equal double the rebate. So now $6,000 is offered for a heat pump fuel switch. And the federal government has now launched the Canada Greener Homes Grant, which is offering up to $5,000 for a fuel switch. And I will also note that all of these rebate programs are stackable. And so this means that a household who qualifies for the income qualified rebate and would be able to stack this with the Canada Greener Home Grant. And so potentially this income qualified household could receive $14,500 in order to switch to a heat pump, which is quite significant. So the CVRD has engaged City Green Solutions to update the strategy to accelerate our retrofits and our targets in order to work towards more aggressive GHG emission reductions. And specifically, the updated strategy will be working to incorporate new demographic information, such as population, housing, and utility consumption. And we'll segment this data in order to leverage existing retrofit programs that can essentially promote specifically to the different housing types and the demographics. The update strategy will also focus on identifying key activities to advance more aggressive acceleration targets. And this will be, like I said, promoting these programs that I just spoke about, like the income qualified and the others, and as well cross-promoting the CVRD wood smoke reduction program. We'll also be engaging member municipalities by coordinating outreach and engagement activities with only a modest amount of municipal staff time. And an example of the kind of activity that we would be identifying would be linking the municipal website to CVRD's rebate website. And another initiative would be to build and engage the local industry. And this would be targeting heat pump installers, HVAC, and contractors in order to ensure that there is the local capacity in the Comox Valley to support the retrofit targets. As of July, Clean BC will be requiring heat pump installers to be registered with the Home Performance Council. And with changes like this, growing contractor capacity is a priority. Key actions will be then prioritized based on costs and anticipated impact. And then we will begin implementing the outreach and engagement activities. For example, these could involve newspaper ads featuring testimonials such as you see on the screen here, and then webinars, utility bill inserts, and website information. These are just some of the examples of some of the initiatives that we can undertake in order to ensure that every household in the Comox Valley knows what available rebates there are in order for them that they would be eligible for. Sorry, next slide, Lisa. And so just in terms of timing, staff will be bringing back the updated strategy in the fall, and then we will begin implementation. And I'll just hand it over to Peter if you have any questions. There he is.
Great, thanks so much. And yes, we have some hands up here, starting with Director Arbor.
Oh, is there more to the presentation? Okay.
No, I think they were just stating that.
Oh,
Peter
they're just a
is
resource
available.
online. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, this is really great that you're bringing this back. And I guess there is quite a gap from I guess you estimated about 100 homes or plus were done, say last year, and our target is like 760 per year. So that's a big jump. I was over the weekend, I was approached, actually, I'll need to email Russell about that, but I was approached by the person who looks after the elder housing on Hornby Island, and it's this 11 units, and we got into a discussion because they were shying away from heat pumps, partly due to their concern that in the event of power outages, which can belong in rural areas and etc. So there was a lot of typical concerns, and also the cost for not just the cost, but the maintenance for older people. And we have a lot of older people in areas, and this requires more maintenance. So they were down to the detail of if they're placed high, like you have to climb in a ladder and to change the filter. And so there was a lot of good stuff. And anyways, I suggested to them, well, we're doing a major effort on heat pumps, so it'd be, that's why I'll send an email to Russell. But it'd be interesting to look at your case, affordable housing. How can we scale up and get past either the education barrier or very real barriers to more adoption? Because then and supporting projects like that can get other people talking, like we did that with the solar project at the depot in Hornby, where all of a sudden there was this little wave of homeowners following that project that did installs. But a couple of things that I'm noticing in this one is in the strategies. We had a long discussion. There were a couple of specific initiatives that were mentioned in January, and Dr. Cole Hamilton was going around BC 2 years ago promoting the PACE program. And I was a reviewer again with the FCM. There were a couple of PACE projects that were put forward, and the Charlottetown, the Switch Atlantic, like they caught on fire in terms of the level of demand for retrofits and heat pumps and the rest of it. So I was curious if a PACE program would be considered for the region. I haven't heard about status. And then the second was building on our carbon offsets. Earlier, I remember there was a gentleman from Union Bay, his name, thank you. Who came and presented around, trying to monetize at scale, a bit like what we're buying with our credit, as it turns out, trying to create something like that for our region or for Vancouver Island or for broader. So those two strategies are not highlighted in the report. And my question is, without those types of strategies, are we confident that we can reach the 700 home target with the tools that are presented today? Thank you.
Yeah, and Robin, would you like me to respond to those questions?
Peter, I have some thoughts, but I'd like you to go first.
Okay, great. So there's a few points to your questions. One, for the 100 homes that switched last year to heat pumps, those are just the homes that fuel switched from a fossil fuel to a heat pump. There was many other retrofits that would have happened within your community. So an insulation upgrade can count towards your greenhouse gas emission reductions, as could wall insulation, air sealing, or many other things. So in this strategy that's moving forward, we'll be identifying all the potential upgrades that could happen in homes, all the rebates that are be available, and then we're working towards, trying to promote all the potential upgrades that could happen, with, of course, fuel switches from a fossil fuel to natural gas being one of the biggest wins for greenhouse gas emission reduction. So trying to really accelerate those numbers to get to 700 homes per year and hopefully beyond, as the board has asked for sort of more aggressive targets. So we'll be looking at those options. Related to the PACE programs, there are two programs in BC now, and City Green helped the district of Saanich and Central Saanich to develop those programs that have just launched within the last month or two. So we'll be sharing whether or not how the uptake about those programs and what could happen in the region. I think the board will also be very interested in knowing that federally, there'll be a 0% interest program being launched by CMHC within the next couple of weeks. So there will be a large national program being operated that will link to the Canada Greener Homes rebate. So there will be a very good zero or low percentage risk financing program in market, probably within a month, that will offer great benefits to residents with sort of no work on behalf of the region to develop your own sort of financing program. So there may be still merit of developing your own PACE type program for sure, but there will be a new and additional financing program available very soon. And then just to Robin for any additions you'd like to add.
Thanks for that, Peter. Director Arbor, I was thinking that in response to why those initiatives or actions were not featured, it has a lot to do with the fact that there are so many rich incentives that are available right now, and that this approach that we took with this update was really to maximize what's available now and really ensure that we get the word out there to every household so that they know what they're eligible for. And I think it would be really good for us to check in and provide what the uptake is on heat pumps once we've done these actions. And then at that point, we can determine what the next step should be at that point, if we're not seeing that we are meeting the targets that we're hoping to achieve.
I guess one additional point, speaking to the folks on Hornby that were hesitant about heat pumps, there is resources, and we'll be looking at that. There's many resources available where people can call and get support to ask questions about, is a heat pump right for my home? And that's one of the things in the strategy we'll be looking at as well, because people have concerns about obviously cost of installation, maintenance, which, whether it will operate in power outages, and, any heating system, any electric or natural gas heating system is not going to function in power outage. So there's some challenges there unless people are on have wood heating or some other source. But that's a very important thing to address about what's going to happen in power outages. But providing some more support for people to answer their questions and concerns, and provide them with more information about heat pumps will definitely be part of this strategy solution. So that's key and in point. That will be something that top of mind that will be addressed. So there will be resources people can go to for that specific question.
Did you have a follow-up, Director?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up. On the air quality, we worked with the wood stove industry and all the rest of that. But I'm wondering, in a sector that we're really trying to support, I noticed one of the heat pumps businesses in my area just built a brand new building on the old Highland Highway. How closely are we working? Do we have a regular method of engagement with installers and businesses in the area, or is that even important in the work that we're doing?
If you'd like me to respond to that, I think engagement with the all industry in terms of retrofits is fairly important. That will be touched upon in the strategy. One, just trying to identify who is doing these types of installations of all types of retrofits. So the board would know, like, how many contractors do we have in the region and who are they? As contractor capacity is key to meeting your targets for residential retrofits. There can only be so many heat pumps installed as there is installer capacity. Thankfully, with the incentive programs available right now for a fuel switch, there's up to $11,000 for switching from a fossil fuel to a heat pump. That's really driving demand for heat pumps in the region. I'm sure all your heat pump contractors are already busy and hiring now, which is a good news story in terms of local economic development and job creation in your region, as well as an opportunity to reduce greenhouse gas emission reductions. So and part of the strategy would be identifying who those contractors are, what they feel their capacity is, and then with the board and region in the future, looking towards how can that industry be supported so they can do more of their good work. And that wouldn't just be heat pump contractors, but for people doing insulation and windows and air sealing and all the other upgrade options for homeowners to reduce their greenhouse gases.
Yeah, just on that note, I'd like to highlight that there are green jobs, and we're talking about, transition away from fossil fuel-based extraction jobs that people say, well, where are the green jobs? Well, this is one area where they are. So next we have Director Hamir.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to Peter and to staff. So I've got two questions now because Director Arbor has just tweaked a comment. So just anecdotally, apart from, connecting with the contractors who are installing, I'm hearing that EnerGuide assessment folks are few and far between. And that might be a choke point if for homeowners that are wanting to assess or access the funding, especially from other levels of government. I don't know if staff have seen or heard from that, or Peter, that we don't have enough people who are actually able to do the home assessments.
Yeah, that is definitely true. And as far as I know, there are multiple, we will be tracking with this just to determine, we can already let you know with this report how many energy advisors there are in the area. We do know that all of the companies, and there are multiple that function in the area, are hiring and bringing on more. So in one sense, this is a challenge and bottleneck. Another sense, it's a good news story, is that there's very high demand for these types of things, and it's sort of demand leads to supply. And so there people are in training. It's a sort of a long training period for people to get through this. So we would be providing an update on that as well as any other sort of industry related bottlenecks that that could hold this up. So, and for the board to know, for provincial rebates, an energy evaluation is not required, but if people want to also access the federal rebates, which most people would want to do, then an energy evaluation is required. So that's another sort of industry capacity component that we would be flagging, hopefully green flagging, but possibly red flagging in the immediate term if there wasn't enough capacity we felt to meet industry needs. But again, that's an important thing to highlight, so that that message gets out there and industry and others know that this is another job area for young or old folks who want to, this is an opportunity for people to get involved and have a green job within your region.
Well, I'm going to take that as a good news thing, that the demand is so high that, we're having to scramble to meet. So that kind of leads to my second comment or question, is regarding, I understood that certain other levels of government do tie their funding to income. And I'm wondering if staff considered for our strategy, if we would focus on low income families. And if not, why not? I'd love to just hear. If I didn't see it in the report as much, and maybe I missed it, but is that something that we are considering? And the reason I'm asking is that I have heard, again, in the community, that a lot of people who were accessing the grants that we were giving out were people who could afford to have done the retrofit regardless. They knew how to access the money and, had quite a lot of, capacity, whereas the folks who may not, or who should be converting, either don't know how, or, don't realize how much money there is, or, just don't think that they can afford it. So have staff considered targeting our dollars based on income?
Through the chair to Director Hamir, I just want to clarify that you're referencing our Clean BC Municipal Top-Up Rebate Program?
Yeah.
Okay. The program is not structured so that we can really attach our own specifications to it. It's really quite structured. You have a tier 1 and a tier 2, and they're two different amounts. And we don't administer the program. We just merely sign a contract with Clean BC and they administer it on our behalf. Clean BC has responded by providing the income qualified program as a way to support lower income households to move towards these energy upgrades. And this is just newly launched in February. So I think it will be really telling to see what the uptake is for that program. And that will be a part of our update to the strategy, is really seeing what the uptake to these new programs and really trying to promote and get the word out that these programs exist. It was a soft launch in February, and I haven't heard of a lot of people being aware about the program. So I think that that's really the work of this update, and our key activities that will be coming out of that will be to really promote what's already out there.
Right. Could a slight follow-up, if that's okay. Is that work that City Green could support? I mean, I heard the micro-targeting, and is that an area, how could something like that roll out if we don't have control over how much or who gets it? do we have control over who hears about it and how we do our outreach?
Yeah, definitely. And that's a very good point. And again, this is a new program, so we know it. You know, you were exactly right. Most people that have participated in rebate programs the past years, usually those with more means that are already, you know, maybe considering purchasing heat pump or now are more capable of participating. With the Clean BC Income Qualified program, the goal of this strategy is going to be for us to identify all our options and opportunities to inform people in the community that this program exists if they're eligible. Because right now people may not be finding out about it. It's not heavily, you probably haven't seen it in like the newspaper or anywhere else in your community being promoted. So the goal of this strategy will be to identify all the means that the region and the member local governments can use to promote this to people who will be eligible for this program. Like bring it to their doorstep, bring it to the newspapers they're reading, bring it to social media so that the sort of no one that might be eligible in the region would not have heard about it, so they can participate. And it is quite a good program. It's much easier to participate. There's a lot more hand-holding when you register. You can sort of call, you can email and have someone hand-hold you through the process to participate in the program. So it might be, you know, very beneficial for someone who's elderly, who doesn't use the internet. There's options for them to be handheld through the program and access much higher rebates than are available to other types of residents. So that's going to be a key strategy, along with everything else, is identify, well, how many wood heated homes? Do they know about the wood to heat pump programs? How many homes are under insulated in the region? That in some cases, the federal program, there's rebates for people to do it themselves. So someone might be very handy and want to upgrade their own attic insulation for less cost and still access a rebate. We'd like to be able to identify those types of people and make sure they know there's that option for them to drive their, you know, go pick up their insulation, put it in themselves and access a rebate. All the opportunities, we sort of want to segment all the various segments of the population to see, here's the options that are available for you in the rebates. And we haven't ever had this much rebate money available for doing energy retrofits that result in greenhouse gases. So there's a perfect opportunity for the region to use its communication resources to let all the residents know about the opportunities available. And that's a fairly cost-effective thing to do. And it's much more cost-effective than actually paying for the incentives yourselves, which would be you know, very expensive.
Great, thanks so much. Director Morin.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks so much for the report. And at the risk of being repetitive, because I was going to talk a little bit about what Director Amir, I guess we've got some telepathy or whatever going on there, but yeah, I was really happy to see this new income qualified program, and I don't intend every meeting I come to mention the word equity, but this one really got me excited around the possibilities. And I think I'll borrow Director Arbor's word, synergies, in terms of some of the community partnerships that we have when I think about having to help identify folks that are maybe not, you know, in the loop on things like this, and supporting families that are lower income, that kind of thing. We can reach out to you know, folks with the poverty reduction strategy that we did, and all kinds of, I think there's lots of opportunities there. And also the school district, we don't talk a lot about the school district and doing much kind of connection with them, but I mean, that's a really great way to get to a variety of families. I'm also thinking about, we don't talk about often sort of targeting landlords or finding a way to reach landlords who may be willing to upgrade their rental homes if they knew about these things. So I just think hoping that we really look kind of outside the box in terms of who we look to reach. And I think that was mostly what I was going to say, was just how we can maybe reach folks that we don't normally reach to let them know. Also, of course, with the new Courtney OCP, we're opening up secondary suites, and there's probably going to be some renos going on with that. So I think there's lots of opportunities to obviously work with the municipalities as well as some of our community partners. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Director Hillian.
Thanks, Chair. A small point, but I just wanted to express appreciation for having this discussion in an open forum about primarily heat pumps. The rationale for why we promote them, the fact that greenhouse gases produced by our home heating is a significant issue. The fact that this is a national and a provincial as well as a local strategy, the encouragement of these incentives, the benefit that it will have for our climate as well as our people. Believe it or not, one of the individuals who wrote to us on behalf of the wood stove industry indicated that he thought our promotion of heat pumps was because we were getting kickbacks from the heat pump industry. So that's the sort of ridiculous drivel that sometimes is out there. And so it's just really good that we've had this opportunity to have this open discussion to clarify the solid scientific and practical rationale for why this program is being encouraged. Thanks.
Great, thanks for that synthesis. Okay, Director Cole-Hamilton.
I'll make this brief. We've been talking for a while on this, although it's important. And just to build on what Director Hilliam was saying, it's been demonstrated that a step 1 house using a heat pump emits a fraction of the GHGs of a step 5 house using a fossil fuel source. So it's a huge saving, and it's one of the most effective drivers out there of reductions in GHGs from homes. And just to respond to Director Arbor's comment earlier, last year I was going around collecting support for PACE, and I'm pleased to see the province actually had an opportunity to speak to Minister Cullen yesterday about that. And it looks like it'll be more the latter half of the year than the former half of the year, but the plan is still to have a central administration model, which makes it very much simpler than the central Saanich example, Peter, that you were referring to, where they had to build the entire thing from scratch. It takes a lot of commitment and a lot of staff time to do it that way. So there is still political will at the province to see that happen. And I just tried to sort of emphasize, given what I was doing yesterday with the OCP and today, that local governments that are rolling out these sorts of plans, it's very helpful for us to be able to point to real, accessible, comprehensible programs and support by the provincial government for the kind of changes that we're advocating, heat pumps and improvements in building envelope. So I guess just on the PACE front, we'll just stay tuned.
Okay, thank you. Yes, the time is now. All right, I don't see any further lights. Oh, I do. Director Grieve, go ahead.
Well, thanks very much, Madam Chair, but I do have a question. You know, we have electric hot water heating, baseboard heating, and I realize that heat pumps are very efficient, but being that they're actually a mechanical device that has a compressor, I'm just wondering, what is the average lifespan of a heat pump? There's been a lot of talk lately of supply chain issues, and I know that a friend of mine works in refrigeration, and he always tells me, don't buy anything made in Korea or China, because in 8 years you won't be able to get a part for it. So I've got an American-made fridge that he says that's good. You can actually still get parts for them. But in this modern day of throwaway society, and with, you know, actually design wear points where things break down so that you have to replace the whole issue. First of all, where are the majority of heat pumps made? And second of all, how long are they supported? Is there a standard? Is there any regulation that says they have to be built to a certain standard, or are they basically part of our throwaway society?
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent question. And one of the things I would say first and like foremost, when we start talking about energy retrofits and greenhouse gas emission reductions, you know, heat pumps is often talked about, but very important for us to consider is that we really want people to improve their homes better. We want to have better insulated homes, like less air leakage, so that the home when they're building is better. It's sort of the building envelopes, hopefully forever, or as long as the life of the house, and heating systems will come and go over time. So we do want to really focus on reducing energy consumption of all types, whether it's fossil fuel, wood, electricity. by making a better building envelope. And that would be key to this strategy and to people, because the more cost-effective thing for them to do is to insulate their home to the maximum level possible. In terms of the life of a heat pump, typically heat pumps are lasting 20 years, as long as other types of heating systems, and particularly as long as they're well installed. Heat pumps do last much longer than 20 years. We're in homes where people have early age heat pumps that are still alive after 22 years, 23, 24 years. Of course, heat pump technology is much better than it was then. So people are upgrading, and I'm quite happy with that. And in terms of heat pumps and getting replacement parts, I mean, heat pumps now are becoming, because of many things that are happening in the world, climate change, all of the situation in Europe, there's going to be a huge transition towards homes across, all through Europe and Canada of transitioning to heat pumps. So it's going to become sort of the dominant heating technology. And with replacement parts like more available than it had been in the past, because they're becoming such a predominant type of the heating system. But the point said, electric baseboards can be a good and low carbon option in homes as well too. So many homes that are already on electric baseboard, the great option might be for them to just upgrade their insulation and make their home as efficient as possible and use as little electricity as possible, and do that cost effectively and low carbon with electric baseboards. And that is why in many very efficient new homes that are being built to the highest level of efficiency, in some cases, they can just heat with electric baseboards because they're so efficient. They only need a few baseboards to keep their home heated. So point well taken in terms of throwaway, making sure we're not just putting in equipment that's not going to be around for a long time. And that's why new programs coming in by the province are sort of ensuring quality installations and that there's good qualified contractors installing the system so they last longer.
Great, really good information. Thank you. Okay, I don't see any further lights, and we are on receipt of the transition retrofit next steps. So I'll call the question. All in favor? Anyone opposed? It's carried unanimously. There's a recommendation. Harbour and Warren, thank you. And the recommendation is that we update the retrofit strategy. Oh, staff get back to us with that update. Any further discussion? Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Okay, next we have the Regional Transportation Mobility Report. Hillian and Cole Hamilton, thank you. And I will pass it to staff.
Thank you. So some of you, probably all of you may remember last year when we had an elected officials forum on transportation, and we had Urban Systems present the mobility primer at that time. So this is just a bit of a kind of an update and follow up on that. So as everybody's aware here, the board, one of the board strategic plan priorities is transportation and maybe a consideration of a broadened transportation focus. Transportation relates to a number of key kind of priorities that we have within various strategies: climate change, health and well-being of our citizens, equity, and affordability, especially with the gas prices and housing prices and all these things these days. So as I mentioned, Urban Systems did do the elected officials forum last year, and oops, sorry, thank you, and and developed this primer. The primer is a really good reference guide for staff, for elected officials, and the public to kind of understand the different modes of transportation that are available, either currently or could be within the community. And it has a number of sections on kind of the trends and transportation travel patterns that are happening within the Comox Valley, which is very useful information. Some of the key highlights of that data that I wanted to share here or highlight. So census data for 20 years, 1996 to 2016, basically showed that the private automobile mode share has continued to dominate. Our efforts around cycling, transit, pedestrian, they really haven't been able to beat the private automobile. more recent data that we purchased and analyzed through the mobility primer last year. We got mobility data from cellular phones from people in the Comox Valley. So we had very accurate data of people's travel patterns, where they went, how long they went, what speeds they went, what modes they went. Again, reaffirming that the private automobile is the #1 mode share here at 75% of all trips versus the census data, which is actually to work. So the mobility data that we got more recently was very interesting in that we were able to do 3 years of analysis, and we looked at the changes during the pandemic. And we did see a big change in the automobile mode share going down and the kind of pedestrian and foot traffic going up as people were, working from home or not working at all, travel restrictions in place, social gatherings obviously to be avoided. So a lot less automobile travel during that period of time, but we've now seen it bounce right back up to where it was prior to the pandemic. So what this is all kind of telling us is that we really maybe need to do things a bit different. We need to shift our focus a little bit. And it was good to see the hierarchy of transportation modes in the first presentation today. That's a tool that we can use to kind of guide our focus. You can see on the top left of this slide, kind of the automobile mode share versus those sustainable modes. And we're at that point where we can kind of choose to continue along with the status quo and continue to have the private automobile be the main mode share, or we can start to do things differently and see some of these other modes become more popular. Some of the examples that I've listed here include redirecting our funding away from the private automobile and towards other things like public transit, construction of higher quality active transportation infrastructure. So instead of a bike lane with a 4-inch wide painted line separating a bike from a car, we should be looking at physical barriers, concrete or planters or trees that really do provide people with that safe infrastructure. We could be looking at repurposing our road spaces away from cars and towards walking, wheeling, cycling, and other new mobility trends that are happening. And we can be looking at removing that incentive to drive a car. So reducing the parking supply, implementing parking fees. Of course, none of these are easy, but these are the kinds of things we would need to start doing in order to kind of shift those mode shares. Another highlight from the mobility primer is the need for regional collaboration. Transportation doesn't care where the municipal boundaries are. People are traveling from rural areas to urban areas, from Comox to Cumberland to Courtenay to all areas within the Comox Valley here. And so we need to coordinate our response, and it is a shared responsibility. What we're suggesting to do is utilize the Regional Growth Strategy TAC, Technical Advisory Committee, which is an existing group. They're multidisciplinary, planning staff, engineering staff, finance can be part of that. It's multi-jurisdictional, local governments within the valley here, Comox First Nations, MOTI, or BC Transit could be part of those meetings. Probably looking at around 4 times per year that there could be a focus with that group on regional sustainable transportation. Some of the key kind of first tasks that we would envision for this group would be looking at it, developing kind of an evaluation framework for identifying those opportunities for transportation and specifically sustainable transportation. Looking at land use is one of the key drivers for transportation. We are starting to see a dense, compact development form within the community, and that's really good to highlight that kind of stuff and continue to do that. Moving forward with the active transportation network plan. So we have a bunch of key projects identified in that plan, and we need to work together to start putting those things in place and getting them constructed. The Transit Future Action Plan, which is nearing completion, there'll be a number of recommendations in there on transit infrastructure and also transit service improvements. And of course, emerging mobility, some of the new things that are coming down our way, we'll need to work together on these things. So speaking of emerging mobility, we're recommending to undertake a regional micro-mobility pilot program next year. There's a mouthful. What we're suggesting is an electric bike share This would be developed and implemented by a private company. We're seeing this in a number of other municipalities in BC. I was just in Kelowna a couple of weeks ago there, and they had electric scooters, they had electric bikes, there were people all over the place on these things. So why we're suggesting this as a pilot project is to help us understand the demand in the Comox Valley for these new types of mobility. How much use do they have? What kinds of uses do they have? What are some of the challenges that we might experience through delivering a service like that? And obviously, what are some of the opportunities that we might encounter? A CVRD could coordinate this, working very closely, of course, with our member municipalities and MOTI. We would all together basically need to look at maybe some of the service requirements that we're looking for. There could be policies within each jurisdiction that might need to be created or amended, bylaws as well, same thing. We would undertake a procurement process to solicit proposals from these private vendors and continue and evaluate those together with our partners. There's a big communication and promotion role as well for CVRD and member municipalities. Once something like this gets established, we would need to help spread the word on the new program, educate residents about it and why we're doing it. And luckily, there's very minimal costs associated with this pilot project, and whatever costs are needed are already within the RGS budget. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. We do have some questions, starting with Director Grave.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I was just reading a CBC report by Kyle Bakes about transit ridership in Canada. And of course, we just got through a couple of years where there are billions of dollars, thanks to FCM, that were directed towards transit to keep it alive and afloat. But apparently ridership is down across Canada, 52% in urban areas and down 80% in the small communities. So even though things like active transportation, walking, biking, et cetera, in the urban areas is actually up. I think your stats bear this out as well. But gas prices are through the roof and nobody cares. They're still in their cars. So, like a lot of the things we discussed around the table today, we're talking about changing habits. We're talking about social engineering. And I can tell you, good luck. It usually takes a generation, historically. But one of the things I found interesting, and when we did our rural OCP a number of years ago, was the fact that multi-passenger vehicles from the 2005, I think it was 2005, you probably have the actual dates, but I think it was Avenue did the traffic study, and in 2005, 24% of vehicles had more than just a single driver vehicle. By 2016, it was down to 7%. So we're obviously trending in the wrong way. So my wife, who actually turned me on to this report this morning, she says, why don't they make buses free? Everybody use them.
Yeah, free transit is not the first time that's been brought up. I think it's still going to be hard to compete against the convenience of the private automobile, even if transit's free. It's almost free at $2 a ride right now. And more importantly, making transit free, that money needs to come from somewhere else. And is it, a tax increase that we're going to have to see to keep transit service levels the way they are? What we've seen in the research we've done is that the biggest impact on transit ridership is better service. If you make it more frequent, more direct, extending the span of service, that's what brings people onto transit and makes it a viable option for them. It's not the cost for most people.
Yeah, I think it's the convenience, right? That's really what we're talking about. We need to make it convenient for people. And, it's been proven with the active transportation that safety is a big part of convenience, having that safe lane right there for you and your family to cycle on. And And also, the on-demand transit is something that would be more convenient for people. So that's something that's also in this report that we can talk further about. Director McCullum.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm very interested to see really any pilot programs that we can implement that would lead to more uptake in alternate or active forms of transportation. Although I do have some reservations about doing this pilot program, just because I know that in some communities there has been quite a bit of blowback or pushback, especially around the scooters more than the e-bike share. And then just the complexity of dealing with charging and various stations, and that it is really, we're talking about using the RGS to provide this program, but it really would not be used by anyone outside of the core development areas or very infrequently, because it's all about convenience, which means that if you're living more than about, I would say 200 to 300 meters away from where these share stations are, then it's not really a convenient means of getting people out of their vehicles. And that's not to say that I'm completely opposed to looking into it. I think there's definitely some value in exploring it. But something that we have heard many times from active transportation consultants is one thing that does increase active transportation use is e-bikes. When people switch from a conventional commuter to an e-bike, they are comfortable traveling usually 30 or 40% longer distances. And there are a few examples in BC of municipalities that have done a rebate program for e-bikes. Saanich had huge uptake with theirs. It was oversubscribed, and Nelson does, I think, interest-free loans through their power utility. So I guess my suggestion would be, if we're going to look at a program like this, perhaps we could consider a rebate program or look at the two, one against the other, because something that occurs to me with the rebates is that it really wouldn't be limited to just people living in the urban areas. And there you could see uptake of more people cycling from further distances in our community. So I would just suggest that maybe we consider looking at both and looking at the implications and the costs around each of them.
Staff want to respond, or should we move on?
If we get some direction from the board to do that analysis, we can definitely review those two options against each other, or look at ways of kind of doing both. I'm not sure what the funding requirement would be. I have seen examples of rebate programs. I believe there's actually one in Saanich, and so yeah, with some funding source identified, we could definitely be looking at offering a rebate program, and maybe that's something to consider as part of the financial planning process for next year.
Yeah, I'll wait until others chime in before I make a motion. Yeah, and the other comment I wanted to make about the bike share is just that being a part-time commuter is difficult unless you're a dedicated commuter. We have helmet laws, you need rain gear. It actually, if we're looking to facilitate more people getting on the roads on a bike, I think it could make more sense to subsidize the cost to people that are interested in doing it regularly, rather than creating an option for convenience, just because it's not that convenient to ride a bike if you don't do it very often and you don't have a bike lock and a helmet with you. So just wanted to make those additional comments. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, we have Director Morin.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I feel like I'm just following everybody tonight with the comments I was going to make. Yeah, I like the idea of the pilot project for the share program, but I actually would like to see some investigation into the rebate program as well. All I have is anecdotal evidence, but I have a fair amount, because these days I'm straddling the world of an almost senior and the parents of preschoolers. So I hang out with parents of preschoolers quite a bit with my grandson and then older folks. And everywhere I go, people have e-bikes. I was at a birthday party recently and 3 people had just gotten an e-bike and the rest of them all had e-bikes. And these are not people I normally would hang out with. And then I went to another event where all this people my age had e-bikes. So I think it's a huge opportunity because people who are not necessarily cyclists, I mean, we know the Director McCollums and the Director Cole-Hamiltons are rugged and out there on their bikes in all weather. But other folks are really utilizing e-bikes for errands, groceries, kids to school. Like they're actually utilizing them because they save time and all those other things. And what I would obviously like to see is if we go down this path is having something designed to prioritize folks with lower incomes, because we do see lower income folks who have had some help getting an e-bike who are using them to get to work and stuff. So I know Director Cole-Hamilton and I have spoken about this, and I think he's probably got some comments and as well. And we did, have some ideas and bantered around some things. So I'll hand it over to other people, but I really think the time is now to really kind of ride this wave of the frenzy around e-bikes. People were saying they had to wait to get their bike in because there's just so many orders going in. So thanks.
Thank you. Next, we have Director Hamir.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Mike. I guess we started this report off with a little bit of a depressing statistic with how few people were changing their mode of travel. And I just need to share, Director Moran shared her experience with the e-bikes. I spoke to a local service group this last week, and I asked well, first of all, I was asked why the regional district is not supporting density in the rural areas. And at the same time, the same person was also complaining about congestion on the roads. And for whatever reason, the penny didn't drop there for them. So thank you for this report in highlighting that density belongs, in the municipalities so that we do not encourage people to get into their cars and drive everywhere. So same group of people, I asked a show of hands of how many people had ever ridden the bus, and no one put up their hand. So, and then I'm heartened to hear, Director Moran say that a lot more young families and people are choosing e-bikes. So heartened to hear that. I do share the 2 concerns about a bike share versus a bike rebate. I would love to see that analysis because I can't see how a rural, people in the rural regions would be able to take advantage of a bike share unless it was more just for, recreation rather than for something to be used on a regular basis. So that's just my comment there. And also, to Director Moran's comment about tying a rebate, if we do go down that direction, to income so that we get, folks who couldn't otherwise afford to have an e-bike. So would love to have that culture here in the Comox Valley. My last comment regarding the TAC, if we do go down that road, I would love to see that. I would love to also see more civil society members on that TAC. We have a fantastic cycling coalition that puts on e-bike training programs. We also have people who ride transit, students, low-income families, having their opinion on where ridership should go or how services could be improved, I think is going to be really important. And I think we miss that if we don't include spaces for them on those technical committees. So thanks.
Thank you. Next, we have Director Arbor.
Thanks. Yeah, I was actually really happy with this report. And the idea of piloting something, I think there seems to be support for investigating the couple of options, the rebates and the versus hiring a company. I think they both have pros and cons. The utilization with a company of the e-bike might be a little higher, perhaps. I don't know, right? If because you might give rebates and maybe the bike ends up sitting in a garage. I don't know, right? Like how would you ensure something? Let me backtrack. Something I really liked about the heat pump recommendation was that, you know, there was acknowledgement that there's a ton of rebates out there. And so we're going to perform more of an education role about the rebates. So it's very low cost to the regional district. And there was discussion about how a rebate program can be pretty expensive if you're trying to scale up to a big amount of people and affect mode share. And then, but where I agreed was, yeah, the low income, you know, they may not utilize a private service. I don't know, right? So I think a lot of great questions. But the other thing is that came up with Dr. Morin's comments is an intervention needed? Because what she said is, you know, people are buying them. So I'd love to see the analysis of, will the market look after itself, right? And maybe there's a gap with low income, I don't know, but I'd love to see the stats. Sometimes when the market is just growing fast, you don't need to throw rebates at it, or you don't need to, you know, to incentivize necessarily. And also the other thing that's going to happen is I imagine that the used market for low income people is going to start to grow as some of those e-bikes get a little older. So a lot of questions, but basically I'm in support. The other one, the other piece in the report was the Zunga bus, which that was interesting to see the you know, the half of the cost of the bus. So I would have liked to see us maybe you're saving that because you brought it in the transit future plan and the transit stuff, but I think it'd be great to see a pilot in our region that supports that. And obviously all of this calls, as was mentioned, for more investment in active transportation infrastructure. And we still don't have a great answer at the regional district about how we're going to fund this. Our $40 million of priorities that would make it easier for people to bike around and get out of the cars. Yeah, we haven't heard the word service tonight from our CEO. I'm quite surprised. We're talking about all these different initiatives and we haven't said yet that we need a service to house all these things, partly because some of the things are pretty cost-free, you know, like we're either getting a grant or we're doing education. But basically in favor, I would add the Zunga bus to the e-bike idea. Thanks.
Thanks. Next we have Director Cole Hamilton.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And Director Arbor, I believe the Zunga bus, we've already applied to be a pilot project with BC Transit. I think that was in the report. So it sounds like we're already in line. But yeah, I would also, like you, be very eager to see that happen. Regarding e-bikes, I guess not to be just having a dialogue with you, but your question of like, does it need to push the adoption of e-bikes? And I think it probably does, because they're not inexpensive, and I think a lot of people who could use them, who might use it as a family car instead of a family car, I should say, because it's a lot more affordable, or instead of a second car in a low-income household, those people, it's still a challenge to put together the funds for an e-bike. And Councillors, Directors McCollum and Morin and I actually had a chance a while ago to speak to a councillor from Saanich about how their program worked. And it was very much targeted towards people experiencing poverty. And that does seem like a useful gap. And certainly the reaction in Saanich and the response from councillor we spoke to, Councillor DeVries, was that it had been oversubscribed and was a great success. And it just got people who otherwise wouldn't be on e-bikes out doing exactly that. So I think after the fruits of our conversations, I think Director McCollum's going to propose a motion which I think kind of aims in that direction. Thanks.
Thanks. Dr. Morin.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I always forget something. I also had an opportunity to talk to the Cycling Coalition folks, and they're just eager to help us out in terms of offering some education or, I just did the ride right with them, and it was a little nerve wracking. I certainly saw where I like to ride on our bike lanes and the places I like to avoid. So I saw the gaps there for safety, but I think, there are some good education programs out there for people who, haven't cycled for a long time or are new on an e-bike. And just in terms of the behavioral change piece, I think what we're seeing with e-bikes is a behavioral change, because we're seeing people who have not been cyclists during their life. Like, it's not been a thing for them really. So I think that in itself is a behavioral change that's already happening. And the more we can encourage that and open up the opportunity for other people, I think is good. So, and then just finally around the evaluation piece, which I think was kind of brought up, like, how do you know if the e-bike's going to sit in the garage or whatever? I believe Saanich did have I don't know if it was university students or something that were involved. Maybe the other directors could remind me, but I think they had some kind of monitoring of how it was working and that kind of thing. So I think there are ways to sort of get a sense of who's, what the outcomes are. Thanks.
Thank you. Next we have Director McCollum.
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to circle back on making a motion on looking at the cost of doing some type of rebate program. And I think what I'll do is just leave the recommendation alone and then do a subsequent one just to keep things simple. And I wanted to make one last comment, going back to the micro mobility pilot program, and just where I do see we have some challenges, I think there are some opportunities there too. So I don't want to take away from what's in the report. I just think we should look at both, and wanted to make the other point that North Island College will have housing being built in this fall. And to me, that strikes me as a really great opportunity for micro mobility, bike share, or whatever it's going to look like when we have people living in smaller housing in one area. So just want to make those comments, and then I'll come back after we vote on the motion.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Hamir.
Thanks, Chair. Director Arbor mentioned, our role in educating regarding the heat pump rebates, and it tweaked the idea that I know a few years ago, some of our local EV car and EV bike folks held a fair at the regional district at the sports center, and amazingly, like after just allowing people to test and to try out bikes, there was a huge uptake in purchasing. And so, I mean, that's a very low cost thing. I don't know how much involvement we as a regional district had in that, other than providing the site. But there's another opportunity I think that we could also play in convening, kind of educational, like try a e-bike out, connecting with the school districts and maybe targeting families, so that we get the folks that may not necessarily come out to either the sports center, but move into the communities where we know e-bikes could really be taken up well if folks were given a chance to try them out. So I'm not sure if staff think, is there a possibility of doing something like that, or have we participated in the past in something like that?
Yeah, I remember the electric car fair, and we did have a minimal role to support it, other than just providing the property. So it depends, I guess, if we could find a group, like in that case, it was the eMotive group that had put on that fair. If there's a similar group for e-bikes, maybe the Cycling Coalition, that might be a great partnership, and we definitely look at that.
Through Madam Chair to the directors, I think in various ways, folks are hitting on some of the principles or the points around why we thought an e-bike pilot would be a potential, right? So it's to introduce folks. It is a big investment for households. So this perhaps would be a program where we would work with a third party to say, these are our objectives, these are our principles, this is how we want you to design the program. And then this is the monitoring you want to do, because here's our end game. So this wouldn't be just, flip it to a third party to shop their bikes. That's really not what we're looking at. We're looking at making a dent, accessing folks, to help make that mode shift. So yeah, the Cycling Coalition is a great example. We've had really good back and forth with them. They were great, a great assistance to us through the Active Transportation Network Plan, and have absolutely, expressed their interest. And we have mutual interest in working with them on the Right Ride programs. We did one of those programs with them last year here with CVRE staff. We had good take up. Daphne and Mike organized that. It was a success. So education, outreach, and then hit some of the principles that you're looking for. So that's our motivation. That's where we're coming from.
If I can just add, staff asked like other groups. So apart from the Cycling Coalition, I think the Comox Valley Nurses for the Environment, that is another group that I think helped to coordinate some of these, but totally agree with moving in this direction. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Don't see any further lights. So we're on receipt of the Transportation Mobility Report. All in favor of receipt? Anyone opposed? That's carried unanimously. And do we want to break up the next motion so that the last and finally that about micromobility be considered separately? Or should we all do it together? Okay, Arbor is moving the entire motion as is, and Tamira seconded. And discussion on the motion? It's about creating our TAC and sending letters to the municipalities and the micromobility e-bike share pilot. Okay, no lights. I'll call the question. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried unanimously. Director McCollum.
And I'll move that staff produce a report outlining options for a program to subsidize the purchase of e-bikes, which prioritizes people experiencing low incomes as defined by the federal low income measure.
Okay, it's been moved by McCollum, seconded by Cole Hamilton. Any further discussion? And can you read it out one more time? Thank you.
Sorry, too fast. That staff produce a report outlining options for a report to subsidize the purchase of e-bikes, which prioritizes people experiencing low incomes as defined by the federal low income measure.
Okay, great. Oh, Director Moran, go ahead.
I think you might have misspoke. I think the first part was program. A report outlining options for a program. I think you said report twice. Yeah.
Okay. Are staff able to put it up, or is we're just going off of the floor? Good. Okay, Director Grieve.
But just a question, is there provincial or federal funding for this, or is this going to be another thing we're going to lump into the RGS, the big dump all of services? Because I do think that, we have to prioritize, and I mean, there's e-bikes are, probably, as you say, it's transitioning all by itself. It doesn't. I know we're trying to support people in lower incomes and what have you, and of course that's very laudable. But we've got a lot of irons in the fire right now.
Madam Chair, if you adopt the resolution, we will come back with a report that will address that, and learning from our experience with the previous report and rebates, certainly look at whether there are options of others to participate in the program and to provide the financial support for this. We'll look for partnerships and advise you as to whether there's anything available along those lines too.
Thank you, Director Arbor.
Yes, speaking in favor of the motion and very much along the lines of our CEO. You know, I remember, I don't know if it's still the case, but the Scrap It program had options for rebates for the people who scrap their old car. They would get a certain amount for an electric car or a hybrid or an e-bike. So I think he's right that we will find potentially some synergies with other types of funding. And but for now, it's just to get a report. So I'm definitely in favor.
Thank you, Director Morin.
Yeah, I was just going to say that was my understanding, that the report would take a look at what the options might be. I mean, the e-bike rebate was part of the mobility primer, so it is, you know, part of what we were, you know, one of the recommendations to take a look at. And there are some other areas that have implemented it, so it wouldn't be necessarily reinventing the wheel. Thanks.
Bicycle wheel, 2 wheels.
Great. Okay. Director McCollum, go ahead.
I just completely lost my train of thought there watching the screen. I've been up for a really long time. I believe that Clean BC does have e-bike rebates for cargo bikes for businesses. And I'm not sure exactly what the amounts are, but that might be a starting point to look at. I'm obviously looking at the model that's worked fairly well in Saanich would make sense too, but I mean, a good quality cargo e-bike, which is a lot of what this discussion has been around young families, being able to bring kids to school, groceries, a decent quality bike of that type is around $5,000. So, you know, a rebate of $1,500 would bring that bike down to maybe what would be considered more affordable, and definitely bumps it down a bit cheaper than a used vehicle if a family's debating a second car or a cargo bike. So just wanted to make those final comments. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any further lights. The motion is in front of you. It's been first and seconded. I will call the question. Oh.
Just getting the actual wording from the director here.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay. So, yeah, no further lights. I'll call the question. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, so that brings us to our final report of sorts. It's a CAO recommendation.
Madam Chair, directors, just feel that many of these initiatives are going to require the full cooperation and support and resources of our municipal partners. And nobody can do that better than you, the directors that represent your councils. So I would encourage you to have those conversations with your senior staff and the rest of your council. But also thought formally it would be good for the chair to follow up with a letter specifically outlining the 3 initiatives that you undertook tonight that will require that support.
Great, thanks, Russell. Any further discussion? Director Arbor.
I just want to say how much I appreciated all this stuff packaged into one tonight and with a climate focus, because we've had it come in and out of different meetings, and to see it in such comprehensive manner. My only question to the CEO is, in the past, a lot of those conversations were always leading to the question of, do we need a service to do this? Because some of these things are a little bit beyond the scope of many of our services. So is there a feeling among staff that using the RGS service that we can carry everything that we discussed tonight forward?
To a certain extent, yes, and we certainly put our minds to that. You recognize that it is a pilot program, which is similar to a feasibility study, right? We are using the capacity regional districts have to experiment with services and report out on them before you establish them or find a pigeonhole within an existing service that it might qualify for. So.
Great, thank you. So we're on receipt? Or is this the motion? Okay, we're on the motion. All right, any further comments? All right, I'll call the question. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried unanimously.
George in camera.
No in camera, just, yeah, just the termination. Moved and seconded. Thank you. All in favor? Thank you. And yeah, just want to say a big thank you to staff. I know that a lot of work went into that.